I used to be an Air Force pilot. I'm not going to tell you when or in what country, for the sake of staying anonymous. Everything that I'm about to tell you is covered by a non-disclosure agreement, one which I am clearly about to violate. I should mention that I never flew any combat missions. I didn't work with those kind of planes. I flew transport planes, mostly carrying equipment from one research site to another, sometimes, but very rarely, flying only people. These were large, four-engine prop planes. I know that seems very old-fashioned nowadays. We're pretty much all military and commercial planes have jet engines. And I would be lying if I said that it wasn't the perfect plane for the job. But it's what we had to work with. There was a door which led to a middle area connecting the cockpit, with the large area where the equipment accompanied by some scientist was held. We called this the holding bay, and a smaller compartment with some emergency maintenance equipment, along with some electronics and a backup fuel tank for emergencies. The holding bay was open in the middle, with hooks on the ground and ceiling to secure the equipment being transported, and two long benches along the sides for the scientist and, if necessary, security to sit. The door to the middle area was lined with lead in case of radioactivity. The cockpit had all the usual gadgets, the altimeter, artificial horizon, fuel gauge, etc. It also had two separate radios, one for ground and flight control, and one to communicate with the people flying along in the back. And the second radio, although rarely used, could save the pilot's life. We could use it to ask the passengers to perform some maintenance, as we flew the plane without a co-pilot and had no one else to do it. According to my superiors, this was due to a lack of personnel, but as I sometimes flew completely finished experimental projects, after which I was always forced to sign an NDA the moment I landed, I suspect it may have been something to do with the secrecy as well. I never liked flying those missions. The lead-lined door connecting the holding bay to the middle area could only be opened from the cockpit. A while ago, while transporting something radioactive, some rookie scientist accidentally leaned against the button that opened the door, when there still was a button inside the holding bay, without realizing that he had touched the button or the fact that the door was now slightly ajar. To make sure no other pilots ran the risk of getting irradiated, the button inside the bay was removed. Lastly, there is a camera inside of the holding bay, sending a live feed to a small screen in the cockpit. When I asked about it, I was told that this was so if something went wrong in the bay, not only was there footage of it, but the pilots would be aware of it as well in case no one in the holding bay was able to tell him over the radio. That didn't do much to reassure me. One day while I was on duty, the alarm was sounded in one of the research facilities. This meant that all the personnel had to be evacuated, and my plane was sent along with another to do the job. Because we had to evacuate quickly, we could not refuel at the facility, and so the backup fuel tank was used to definitely be able to make the round trip. If the normal fuel tank was filled up entirely, the plane should be able to make it. But rather than cut it close, we set off with a surplus. Our call sign for ground control that day was Matmat, myself being Matmat 2 and the other plane 1. Matmat 1 and I landed on the two runways closest to the facility, and quickly taxied to the exit. Everybody was already waiting outside, and as soon as the ramps dropped, everyone rushed aboard. I don't think the ramps were open for longer than 30 seconds before we taxied back onto the runway and we took off. Looking on my screen, I saw a few people, scientists as well as security personnel, sitting in the middle area because of a lack of seats. Everything seemed fine at first glance, until I became aware of a scientist making excited hand movements to one of the security guys. whom I presumed to be the ranking officer. Using the radio, I asked if there was a problem back there.
Everything's fine. The scientist is just nervous is all.
I could hear the scientist in the background, but I could not make out what he was saying. I figured it wasn't an issue, and I focused on flying back to the base. Half an hour over some jungle, and we would be back near the city. I looked back on the camera to see the scientist still excitedly gesturing, this time clearly towards the bench on the other side. I saw some of the people sitting with their heads hanging down. It seemed unlikely that they would be able to fall asleep so quickly after the evacuation, with a man loudly arguing something in the same area as them, and so I contacted the officer again.
It's fine. They're tired. Just focus on the flying.
His patronizing tone annoyed me, but I decided that I would take his advice. More people were tired now, not only on the bench, but some were laying on the floor in the middle too. I had an anxious feeling about the whole situation, but I decided against contacting the officer again. He would probably just repeat himself anyway. Shortly after, a voice came over the radio, a different tone than the officer.
Hello?
Was the scientist that I had seen gesturing. You're breaking protocol. Only the ranking officer is allowed on the... I cut myself off when I looked back at the screen, seeing the officer laying on the ground and the scientist, clearly panicking, standing next to the door. What did you do to him?
You have to open the door. Quickly.
Is he alive? The scientist began shouting hysterically.
No. The plane has been compromised. You have to let me out. We have to do something about this. You cannot land. This can't be allowed to spread.
Almost everyone was unmoving, seemingly peacefully asleep. Only 3 people were still standing, all at the door, gesturing hysterically. I decided to break protocol and I opened the door. I pressed the button and the scientist with the radio fell through it. The other 2 people with him, both letting out screams and falling to the floor. The scientist quickly pushed the door, closed behind him, and it automatically locked again. After about a minute, the door to the cockpit, which didn't have a lock, opened, and the scientist was standing next to me, breathing heavily, tears on his face. What happened in there? He took a deep breath before answering. The facility that had been evacuated conducted genetic experiments on animals. His group's guinea pigs were, ironically, actual guinea pigs. They were testing a growth hormone which was meant to speed up aging, hopefully letting the guinea pigs reach adulthood within a week of being born. Today, one of the mothers had given birth, and one of the scientists brought in 2 babies. While everybody was talking about how cute they were, one of the scientists asked, "Didn't the ultrasound show 3 babies?" Huh, strange. The scientist that had brought the babies in responded, "I guess I must have missed the 3rd one." A few of them went back to the guinea pig cages, only to find the cage open. The scientist promised that he had closed it. When they looked inside, there was no baby. The mother was nowhere to be found either. But to their dismay, however, the cage wasn't empty. A huge spider, as large as a grown man's hand, blacker than the night, was sitting in the corner. This spider was the project of a different group, a group with a more malicious mission. It had gotten out of its confinement, and as was the protocol in such a situation, the alarm was sounded and the facility evacuated. The scientist took another deep breath, shaky breath, and continued. When we entered the plane, we thought we were safe. The ones that knew what was happening shared a moment of relief, while the ones who had no idea tried to find out what had happened. However, when the ramp was almost closed, what looked like an orange gem just got in. I don't know if it was thrown or if it somehow jumped, but it landed in the corner where I was sitting. Inside of the gem was a pitch black spider. His breathing became quicker and new tears appeared in his eyes. I thought it was dead or frozen somehow, in stasis, but the gem. The further he went on, the harder it became for him to finish his sentences. The gem started melting somehow. The spider started wriggling its legs more and more the further the gem had melted. I went to Captain Vasquez and told him about it, but he gasped for air again and let out another shaky sigh. But he didn't believe me, thought I was hysterical, not thinking straight. The gem was entirely melted at this point, and the spider skidded over to the man sitting closest and it bit him. The scientist was crying at this point. Just bit him straight through his coat. A quick yelp and his head dropped to his chest. He was dead almost instantly. The spider had continued to a second man and then a third. Only when the fifth man was bitten did more people realize what was happening. One of these security guards had managed to stomp on the spider, which killed it. But hundreds of smaller pitch black spiders crawled out of the corpse, and people started dropping left and right. That was when the officer was bitten too, and the scientist had grabbed the radio. He paused. With very shaking breathing, he tried to get his bearings, and then he asked me, "Is there a way to blow up the plane?" I looked at him without saying anything. He insisted, "If these spiders get out, they could wipe out cities, and if it's weaponized." He grew silent again, seemingly lost in thought for a good 30 seconds, before speaking in a soft but determined tone. "That venom kills instantly. It needs to be destroyed." I told him about the backup fuel tank and I handed him my matchbox. I also offered him one of my cigarettes to smoke before he blew himself up, which he accepted. I got up and I showed him the fuel tank. The opening was obviously on the outside of the plane, so he would have to use some of the equipment there to get the thing open and drop a match in. I grabbed one of the parachutes, told the scientist to hold on so he didn't get sucked out, and said something along the lines of "Godspeed" before opening the door and jumping out of the plane. After opening my parachute, slowly floating down to Earth, I looked at the plane, flying straight one moment, a huge fireball lighting up the sky the next. I landed in the jungle. My parachute got stuck in one of the trees, and after gracefully falling to the ground and badly messing up my ankle, I started walking. Due to my sprained ankle, the walking went very slowly, and it wasn't until the next day that I got out of the jungle. I reported at headquarters, where I received medical attention and I was debriefed. An officer came in and informed me that Matmat 1 had crashed in the jungle as well. "What a mess," he said, more to himself than to me. "It seems that you're the only survivor. An entire facility wiped out, just like that." He snapped his fingers. The pilot of Matmat 1 had been a good friend of mine, who had gone through some basic training at the same time as myself. Shaken up by the loss of a friend, I asked the officer if they knew what had happened to him. "Not yet," he responded. "Some of our men have just got to the crash site, and are collecting the black box. He paused for a moment before adding, as an afterthought, "Oh, and a bunch of orange gems scattered in the area." When I was young growing up, my parents would always lecture me about the good and evil of the world. They explained to me and my older sister, Jenny, that the world is not a safe place for adventures and exploring the unknown. If somebody tells you to stay away from somewhere, you must do so. We don't take risks like those. We aren't those type of people. Yeah, Dad. Maybe I should have listened to you more when you gave us those talks, because you never know where those risks will actually take you. After I graduated high school, my parents had the expectation of me going to college right after getting my diploma. When I explained to them that I wanted to enjoy my life just a little more before attending a great college, as they expected, I told them I wanted to explore and travel around the United States. They disapproved of it, and I can remember my dad telling me, "When you come back, don't come running to us about your financial problems or asking for money. We had money put aside for your education. But if you decide to travel, well, we're not going to help pay for any of your expenses." At the time, I thought he was being a complete jerk and a dickhead. But I didn't care. I had a dream, and I was going to live out that dream before feeling like I had to become an adult. That summer, I was able to collect some money from a previous job that I had to help pay for gas and food. My Toyota Land Cruiser was still in good shape, and it didn't seem to have any problems that could affect my journey. And so when school was completely done for, I hit the road. I didn't have a plan for where I wanted to go, but for one, it involved exploring abandoned places. I landed myself in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. As I was driving through, it was already past 1 o'clock in the morning. My tired eyes made it harder to stay awake, which somehow led me in front of an old house that appeared to be unkempt and abandoned. With just a little light, I could tell this house hadn't been occupied for a long time. And there was mold growing on the sides of the outside walls, and the grass was at least 3 or 4 feet tall. It was disgusting, but that's what fascinated me about it. I thought that if I wanted to get a better look at this place, that it wouldn't be the best to do so without just a few hours of sleep. As I did, I pulled into the small gravel driveway right next to the house and I parked my car. I jumped into the back seat, where I already had a pillow and a blanket set up for me in the back, where I had been sleeping the past few nights. From there, I was able to rest up for a few hours until I was awakened by a strange and unpleasant sound. It appeared to be coming from behind the house. For a moment, I wasn't sure what exactly I was hearing, but it made my head pound and my ears ache. It sounded like somebody was trying to speak with me. I couldn't identify the voice, but it was laughing and telling me to come closer. The next thing that I remember was waking up, assuming whatever I just saw was a nightmare. A confusing one, that's for sure. And found myself staring at the house, almost forgetting everything that had just happened. I drove around the city, trying to find a good place to sit down and eat. I came across a Waffle House that seemed decent, but again, I was starving. The place didn't have many customers, but still, it had the best food that I had ever tasted. When I finished and I paid, I headed back to the house. I thought that it wouldn't hurt to look around in the daylight, even though I thought it would be even creepier at night. And the creepier, the better. When I first got a look at the house, I didn't realize how many locks and the huge lockbox on the door. It didn't surprise me. Maybe the family that was living there before, they must have been keeping it up for sale. But there was no for sale sign in the yard. Realizing that I couldn't enter from the front door, I thought of breaking one of the windows. Now, I'm not any expert on the different types of glass windows, but these must have been made with stronger, unbreakable materials. None of the windows were easily able to break. At last, I was able to enter from one of the windows that was already broken somehow. Maybe somebody was trying to do the same things as I was. The broken window was in one of the small bedrooms on the first floor. To my surprise, the house was still in good condition on the inside, but terribly disgusting on the outside. The house was fully furnished too. It didn't look like somebody could have stolen anything or tried to either, except the window. For a second, I thought that maybe people were still living here. But why would the inside be so well kept, and the outside look so overgrown and horrible? I had a million questions, but sadly, I couldn't find the answers to any of them. I checked out the rest of the house. It was the same for every room. All nice, well cleaned, and it all smelled of vinegar and stale air. Something just didn't seem right about this house, as if there was a big secret or something that must reveal itself. Either way, I didn't have a good feeling about this place. I looked down at my watch, an old one that was my grandfather's, and the little clock hands read almost 6:30 p.m. That was impossible. I couldn't have been in here for longer than 30 minutes, and I didn't get out of the Waffle House until 12:15 p.m. The feeling as if nothing was making sense kept hitting me. I knew I had to get out. And that's when it happened. When everything went black. The last thing I remember was waking up on the floor, my head pounding and my ears aching. The same feeling I had when I was having that horrific nightmare. But this time, it was much worse. The voice kept trying to speak with me. I knew it was the same voice that was in my dream, but I still couldn't understand what it was saying. It first started as a mumbling noise that I could feel was getting closer. The voice kept getting louder and louder. It was almost as if it was right next to me when it whispered, "They left me alone, and I'm so glad you're here to join me." I screamed. I screamed until I couldn't even feel my throat or hear myself speak. And that's when it appeared. It showed itself. But I couldn't understand what it wanted or how it was here. It looked like the spawn of the devil in the form of a short, discolored, slender man. Its face horrified me, with these huge red eyes, no nose, and the biggest and creepiest smile ever put on a face. It had no ears, only just a few holes on the side of its head. Its hands and feet stretched to about 2 or 3 feet long. And the worst of it all was what it was wearing. The creature stood tall in what looked like doll clothes, fitting perfectly around its body. It tried to talk, but no words came out. I was still as a statue, afraid if I move, this thing will try to kill me or eat me, something like that. It kept walking closer towards me, but this time slower than before. I was confused why it was going so slow, unsure of what it was trying to do. It looked at me like they had never seen such a creature like me. Neither have I to do the same. Just then, a second one comes walking into the living room where I was sitting. This one was much bigger, taller than I was, and I was about 6 feet tall. It looked at me like I was a threat. Kind of like when somebody is unsure how they are supposed to process what's going on at that moment. And that's when it happened again. The pounding headache and the pressure on the ears. I didn't understand what was going on. And who were these oddly strange creatures? Until I heard the voices again. This time I could hear them perfectly, but I still couldn't recognize where I had heard that voice before. But a few moments later, I understood it perfectly. The bigger creature looked into my eyes. It was their voice. They were trying to talk to me. "Excuse me, child. She has never seen a human before. Who are you and how did you get here?" The creature gave me an uncomfortable look. "My name's Michael. I saw this house as I was passing by last night. I needed a place to crash and I thought I could park my car in the driveway and I could get a few hours of sleep. It appeared to me that nobody was living here, so I thought it would be okay. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I just want to get out." The smaller one looked at me, coming closer and closer, touching my face. I could hear her say, "Soft." "I'm not here to hurt you," I started to say. "I just wanted to look through this house for a little bit. I didn't mean any trouble. I just want to get home." The creature sighed, but didn't stop staring at me with its threatening eyes. Communicating with its mind, the creature stated, "I don't trust humans, or anybody in that matter. You cannot leave until we are finished." I was confused at what the creature meant. Finished? And then all of a sudden, there was a huge explosion sound coming from, well, I thought it came from the basement. The smaller creature yelped as if they were shot and hit by 1,000 bullets and disappeared out of sight. The bigger one followed behind. Understanding that whatever was going on wouldn't end well if I stuck around any longer, I stood up and I jetted out of the door, not slowing down for anything. I could still hear their screams from behind me. I didn't know what was going on, but whatever it was, I did not want to be a part of it. I got into my car and I drove off as fast as I could, not turning back or stopping. I was able to reach the downtown area and I ran into a small grocery store to ask if I could use a phone. As I ran towards the payphone in the store, an older lady working the cash register called out to me. "We're closing in 15 minutes. Make it quicker, I'll leave you in here overnight." I wasn't listening and I dialed 911. The operator asked me what was wrong and that's when I realized I didn't even know what had happened. The older lady asked me if I was okay, but all I did was turn around and say, "You won't believe what just happened." The lady looked at me with a concerned look on her face, as if she knew exactly what I was about to say. There was this house and I just stopped off at it because I was just looking for a place to sleep. And the next morning when I woke up, I went inside of the house and I saw these figures. I don't know what they wanted, but they scared the shit out of me. I said all of this, even though I knew she wouldn't believe me. The lady seemed scared and her face went completely white. And that's when she asked, "Was that house on Maple Street?" I replied yes, but what she told me next would make my journey as an explorer come to an end. She started, "There once was a family, the Connors, that lived there many years ago. I would say in the mid-70s or early 80s. I was friends with the mother, Barbara, since we were kids. They were a well-known family that everybody seemed to adore. They had 2 children, Maxine and Gilbert, the 2 cutest and most adoring little kids. Their father, Michael Connor, was a well-known scientist who had a theory that all human life could be changed into its own form with the power of creativity and mystery. In their basement, he had his own laboratory set up where he would do his own experiments. He kept this part of his life very private from the rest of the community and never really talked about his career much. Anyhow, a few years later during one of Mr. Connor's experiments on a small rat, well, we can say that something happened. It forced Mrs. Connor and the kids to move out of the house, and nobody has seen them since. What about Mr. Connor? I asked, unsure of what the answer would be. The lady continued. Well, the truth is, no one knows. We don't know if he moved out or he stayed. He never tried to sell the house if he had moved out, which seems kind of strange. So for what I know, he could still be living there. I was speechless and more unsure of what to say next. I asked her what the easiest way out of town would be, and she told me to just take Highway 88, and it would take me to Philly and I could get a good start there. My mind was all over the place and it made me wonder, was Mr. Connor still in that house? Is that why the house was so clean? But what scared me the most was, did he know that I was in the house and was trying to save me? Was he down in the basement the entire time, just hiding or waiting? And more importantly, what kind of experiment were those creatures a part of? Whatever Mr. Connor did, the lady was right. They were mysterious. Now, I'm just focusing on getting home and doing something else with my life. I thought that I wanted to be an adventurer and go across the country. But now I know that isn't for me. I'm a journalist. Well, I'm trying to be. What I'm about to tell you is a condensed version of a college project that I had started but did not finish. Why? To be frank, if I had turned this in, no one would have believed me. The funny thing is, when I first started, I thought I found the story of a lifetime. You see, after an intense amount of brainstorming and a lot of scouring the dark recesses of the internet, I found something of merit. In Italy, there is a small village of people who had still worshipped Ceres. She was the Roman goddess of agriculture and fertility. Her Greek counterpart, Demeter, some of you guys might be more familiar with. Even luckier for me, or so I thought at the time, they had a festival coming up in the dedication to her called the Cerilia. It took place about mid-April and was a week long. It was a few months away at the time, and that would have been long enough for me to put a team together and plan a trip. I was able to get in contact with a liaison who worked with the village. His name was Roberto, and apparently he was an expert on it. I shot him an email about how I wanted to do a piece on the festival, and to my surprise, he replied rather quickly. Chloe, if you are positive that you would like to do a college report on these people, I can help you. There are a few things you must know, however. These people take their worship for Ceres very seriously. You must follow their laws exactly. If you do not, they will consider it a great disrespect to their goddess. Any sort of disrespect against her might complicate things and make your trip more dangerous than anticipated. All they ask is that you respect their culture, and things should go smoothly. The Lighthouse is a very beautiful festival, which I'm sure you and your peers will enjoy. If you're still interested, I will send you the laws and more information on where you will be staying. I look forward to hearing from you. Roberto. I was ecstatic. Things were falling into place. I emailed him back, and soon I had received instructions on how to get there once I had arrived in Italy. He also sent their list of laws as promised. It was all pretty much common sense stuff. No stealing, especially from crops or livestock. No getting violent with each other or the townspeople, unless it is a part of the festivities. No breaking and entering, and so on. The only one that really stood out was, you are not allowed to leave Sorelia once it is started, as it would be considered a great disrespect to Ceres. Afterwards, I got my team together. It was just a couple of my buddies, and they were people that I knew I worked well with and had done a couple of projects with before. My cinematographer Ryan, my photographer Beth, who also happened to be a big help when it came to taking notes, my video editor Jack, and myself, of course, the lead reporter. I was going to be in charge of writing the report, being the on-camera reporter, and for interviews. I forwarded them the letter from Roberto, the laws, and the rest of the research that I'd done via the internet. It wasn't long before we were on a plane bound for Italy. This is gonna be awesome. I've never been to Italy, Beth said as we boarded the plane. We're gonna have a little bit of downtime before Roberto comes to pick us up, and so we can explore Rome for a bit too, I added. Roberto? Ryan asked. Our liaison, Jack informed him. Did you even read through that stuff that was sent? It's important. Come on, man, try to be professional. Calm down, I'll look over it tonight, Ryan replied. You better, I added. They take their culture very seriously. I already said I would, Ryan complained. Geez, Mom, give me a break. I rolled my eyes and we all took our seats. A long nap, and a few hours later, we had arrived. From the airport, we took a taxi to our hotel room in Rome. Roberto wouldn't be picking us up until the next afternoon, so we would spend the night exploring Rome. Thankfully, Jack was fluent in Italian, since it was the only language his grandmother spoke. We had bought a few trinkets and souvenirs while there was still daylight, and when night fell, we went to a couple of the local pubs. No getting too drunk, I told them as I used the bar counter to support myself. We've got to be up and running tomorrow. You've got it, boss. Jack laughed before turning to the bartender and ordering us another round. I wasn't sure what we were drinking since he had ordered it in Italian, but it was good. So good that I had to make a pit stop in the bathroom, fearing that I was going to be sick. I pushed my way through the crowd into the bathroom and hovered over the toilet for a few seconds before ultimately deciding that I didn't need to vomit. I headed over to the sink and splashed some water on my face. With a deep sigh, I went outside to get a breath of fresh air. Just as I was about to rejoin my group, an older woman approached me. Hi, I started. I don't speak Italian. The woman clearly did not understand me, as she'd begun to speak Italian. I'm not sure what she was saying, but she seemed to be upset. It wasn't long before she started to yell. I'm sorry, I don't. I stammered as I noticed my friends heading towards us. Jack, can you help me out here? Jack had said something to her, but she had only seemed to become more frustrated with us. Whatever they were saying seemed to be intense. Eventually, Jack lightly grabbed my shoulders and began to lead me and the rest of the group away. Addio, he said firmly as we headed back to the hotel room. What was that about? I asked. The locals were telling me that she was the town crazy, and so it doesn't matter, he answered. Come on, Jack, I want to know. I went on with a slight hiccup. Maybe this could be a good opening piece. I doubt it, Jack replied. Look, she was giving us a warning. She told us to go home. Jack paused before continuing. Did you tell her where we were going or what we were doing here? No, I couldn't if I wanted to. You're the only one that knows Italian, I reminded him. Why? Does she know something that we don't? No, Jack responded as he shook his head. She probably just hates tourists. Come on, let's get to bed. I wanted to know more, but Jack would not budge. Maybe if he'd told me what she had said, it would have scared us enough to turn back. No, it would have only made us more eager to figure out the truth. That's just the kind of people that we were. We went to bed shortly after that. The next morning, we were all up early. We packed our things and headed towards the meeting spot Roberto told us to wait at. You sure this is legit? Ryan asked. Positive, I replied. Another cool thing, the closest you'll get to an ancient Roman festival. They kept it pretty accurate. Ryan nodded as a light blue, small four-door car pulled up to the street corner. Ciao, an older man called out from the driver's seat. You are Chloe, yes? That's me, I stated. It's nice to meet you, he smiled. For those of you who don't know, I'm Roberto. We went down the line, introducing ourselves as we got in. Jack had said something to Roberto in Italian, which had caused him to erupt in laughter. So, how long until we get there? I asked. 3, maybe 4 hours. I hope you're comfortable, Roberto informed us. We traveled for a while, making small talk the whole way. From what I could gather, the small village had spoke Latin still, though they also knew Italian. About 4 hours later, Roberto parked in a field. That had made me nervous. Where's the village? Beth asked. It is up the trail. They don't like cars, so from here, we walk, Roberto answered. We all got out and then grabbed our equipment and luggage. The hike to the village had left me wishing that I had packed lighter, and I'm sure the others were too. The only upside was the beautiful view surrounding us. When we had gotten to the village itself, I was even more amazed. There were fields of wheat, corn, vegetable gardens, orchids, grazing animals, a large pond, and stone buildings scattered all around. Beth had taken the opportunity to snap a few photos, and Ryan recorded the landscape. Let's get our opening piece, I began as I lightly brushed my hair. Ryan handed me a microphone and counted me down. This beautiful land is home to a small village without a name, one that many don't even know exists, I began. But somehow, the ancient Roman ways have thrived here, and it's virtually untouched by modern society. These people have so kindly allowed us to come and observe an ancient festival, the Sorelia. It's a 7-day festival in dedication to the goddess Ceres. As you can see, the families that reside here are busy preparing for the week. We hiked down to the village, which was actually pretty crowded. The women were wearing white and the men were wearing different colored tunics. Beth was snapping pictures left and right, especially of the men and women riding around on horseback. There is no electricity here, Roberto stated. Only candlelight. Good thing we brought a lot of extra batteries, Ryan stated. Come, I would lead you to the house you will be staying in, Roberto continued. Roberto brought us to a small building, inside of which was an older woman who welcomed us with a smile. The boys were sent to one room, and Beth and I to another. The older woman gave Beth and I white dresses, and spoke to us in Italian. "This is Gilia. She says the women wear white during the festival," Roberto informed us. "It's to honor the daughter that Ceres lost." Beth and I nodded, and quickly changed. Soon all of us had met up again in the house's common room. "Nice outfits," Ryan commented as he adjusted with his gauges. Gilia shook her head and mumbled something while looking at Ryan. She then returned to working on fake bread, an easy-to-make grain-based substance they used as a sacrifice to Ceres. "She doesn't like your piercings," Jack laughed. "Well, gauges and nose rings aren't for everyone," he replied. "The white is for Ceres' lost daughter," Beth stated. "Let's get recording," I ordered. We filmed a small segment and tour of Gilia's house before we headed out into town. From what I gathered, the festival was just a large party for the whole village. On the first night, they would hold the race of the foxes, and they would also routinely sacrifice pigs. Ceres was not a fan of them, as legend has it they would destroy her crops, and now they would eternally pay the price. They would also hold chariot races, give offerings to Ceres, play music, play ancient carnival games, put on public performances, and of course get drunk. As the day went on, we were able to lock in an interview with a priestess. She was one of 4. In total, there were 2 male priests and another priestess, but they were busy tending to the festivities. "What can you tell me about the festival?" I asked. "Why do you celebrate?" Jack was kind enough to translate both ways. "We do it to honor our goddess, and in return, our goddess honors us," Jack answered. "Because we have vowed ourselves to her. She keeps us safe. We have water while others have droughts. We have food where others have famine. We have close families while others drift apart. We love our goddess, our mother, and we know that she loves us. We are truly blessed." "How do you divide the land up between citizens?" I went on. "Who does what?" "These lands are not ours. We just live on them," Jack translated. "It all belongs to our goddess. We all do our part to respect it and each other. We keep everything running by working together." We interviewed a few other citizens, but they all said different versions of the same thing. They were all blessed to live on their goddess's land. I think it was around noon that day when we caught more controversial footage. There was a boy, probably 15, being whipped publicly. "What the hell?" Ryan murmured as he began to record. I winced as I watched. Beth had wanted to do something, but Roberto stopped her. "This is their way," Roberto informed her. "Don't get involved." He broke one of Ceres' laws. He's lucky that he's still underage. His father's fate is much worse. "Come, let's get ready for tonight." Roberto ushered us away despite our complaints. Later that night, Gilia had served us dinner. It was meat, bread, and vegetables. According to Robert, the meat was pork, but there was something off about it. Once we had finished and cleaned up, we went to view the race of the foxes. Gilia handed Beth and I torches before we left, and said something to us. "The women carry the torches," Roberto informed us. "That's also in honor of Ceres' lost daughter." Our group headed down to the large field, where a crowd had already begun to form. Because we were doing a story on the village, we were able to get a good view in the front. At one end of the field, there were 6 foxes lined up. Burning torches had been tied to their tails, which were causing them discomfort. Isn't that animal abuse? Beth remarked as she took a picture. I suppose, but it's a time-honored tradition, Roberto answered. When in Rome, I guess, Ryan said as he began to record. This is the race of the foxes, I stated into the camera. It is meant to punish the foxes for their wrongdoings against Ceres. As the story goes, a fox had once stolen her sacred chicken. A farm boy, having caught the fox, tried to set it on fire. The fox managed to escape, running while still burning. This is one of the darker tributes to their goddess. They released the foxes and we watched as they ran off into the darkness. Behind them, the crowd was cheering and placing bets on who would win. The rest of the night consisted of loud music, drinking, dancing, and eating street foods. As it grew later, a pig was brought down from the barn. Two men were pulling the pig towards a marble altar in the town square, but it was resisting. It kept pulling back from the farmhands leading it. Eventually, they were able to get it on the altar, but it still struggled against them. It was like it already knew what was about to happen. With a quick swipe of a knife, one of the priests cut its throat. It let out a loud squeal, causing Beth to look away. Afterwards, the townspeople lined up to place their offerings. Even Gilead placed her fake bread. You get all that? I asked Ryan. You bet, he replied, still recording. I nodded and I looked to the large wooden barn in the distance. I could hear more frightened squeals coming from the other pigs. There was something underneath the animals' panicked cries though. Something that sounded almost human. I had woken up later than I wanted to that morning. Thankfully, I hadn't missed much. After I had gotten dressed in another white tunic, I had met up with the others in the house's common room. Gilead prepared breakfast. It was eggs and bread, along with some fruit. Tell her thanks, Jack, I said groggily. He translated for me and Gilead smiled. We got a lot of great footage last night, Ryan commented. Yeah, hopefully we get some more today. They're doing chariot races in the field, Jack added. I can't wait to see the horses in action, Beth started. I would like to see something positive for once. I don't know how positive a chariot race is gonna be, Ryan blurted. I mean, haven't you seen any of those movies based on ancient Roman times? They were actually pretty dangerous. Don't burst her bubble, I yawned. Hey, I'm just trying to prepare her, Ryan shrugged. It's better that she knows the truth, Jack added. I can handle it, Beth exclaimed. I'm just getting tired of, violence. I thought this was gonna be fun. Well, that's journalism for you. You never know what can happen, Ryan said with a mouthful of fruit. We headed out into town and began to document the events of the day. It was late afternoon when the chariot races were said to happen. We had made our way to the fields and began to set up. Ryan counted me down as he started to record. Today, on the second day of Cerilia, the chariot races will be held. You can sense the excitement in the crowd as they ready themselves for the event. Many are placing bets already based on last year's winners. Drinks are being poured. Foods are being shared. This truly is a cheerful celebration for them. I finished. Our next stop was to record interviews with those who had entered the race. The first man we spoke to seemed to be a bit older than the rest, but nonetheless, he was still hopeful. Forget those others, they are boys. Jack translated the man's words for us. What it takes to win this race is skill. It takes knowledge of the track, and knowledge of what your horse can handle. I'm confident that I will win. The next contender was a younger boy, who seemed to be equally excited. This is my first race. Jack continued to translate. I've been preparing all year. I don't expect to win, but I'm hoping to be one of the first 3 to finish. And then I will know that all of my efforts have been worth it. We recorded the race from the front row. The field it was taking place on was downhill from us, which gave everyone a clear view of the chariots. The first lap was walked in order to introduce those racing that year. With the next lap, the races began. The crowd chanted as the chariots took off. After a minute or two, the first of the chariots had a tumble. It was no surprise to the crowd that it was the younger boy. He narrowly missed getting run over by another chariot, but soon he limped away and his horses were escorted off the track. The winner was a man that we hadn't had a chance to interview, but the older fellow that we had spoken with earlier had come in a close second. The rest of the second night was pretty much like the first. Dancing, music, drinking, etc. Again, the citizens sacrificed a pig. This time, it was pregnant, and again their offerings were left at the altar. I sent Beth and Jack to do some independent work, and I sent Ryan out to record some of the events while I took notes. When I had found Ryan again, he was clearly drunk. Man, this place isn't too bad. Ryan slurred as he bumped into me. What the hell, man? You were supposed to record the party, not join in. I growled. Take it easy, he mumbled. It's the same as yesterday. What am I gonna miss? I shook my head and I rubbed my temples. Go back to the house, I ordered. You can't tell me what to do. Ryan responded as he handed me his camera. Here, take this. I quit. You're way too drunk. I know because that's the only time you're ever this annoying. I snapped. Seriously, get back to the house. I'm trying to be professional here. Nah, no way. I see one of the girls making googly eyes at me. I think I'm gonna go for it. He smiled as he pushed past me. Damn it. I muttered as I went to find Jack. I didn't have to look far. He was interviewing a few of the older residents nearby. Jack, I interrupted. Can you please help me deal with Ryan? He's drunk. It was a bad idea for me to leave him alone. It's not your fault. He's a grown man. He shouldn't need a babysitter. Jack sighed. Where is he? I don't know, I answered. That's not good. Jack mumbled as he looked off into the distance. What? I asked as I turned around. I saw what Jack was seeing. There was Ryan leaning on the altar, eating fruits meant as offerings for Ceres. It seemed as we weren't the only ones to notice. It was as if the whole village had gone quiet. Oh no, I began. Didn't you read the freaking letter Roberto sent? Hey guys, Beth said as she approached us. Is something wrong? Look, Jack responded. We watched as the outraged citizens began to yell and throw drinks and food at him. A couple of furious men had grabbed Ryan and held him down as he struggled. The 3 of us had tried to get to him, but Roberto intervened. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he told us. One of the priestesses had approached Ryan, holding a wine glass filled with a light green liquid. She spit on Ryan as she said something that even Jack could not translate. Pig, Roberto informed us. She said pig in Latin. The 2 men holding Ryan down had opened his mouth for him, and the priestess poured the green liquid down his throat. He had spit out some of it, coughing and choking, but she had only poured more. Shortly after, they dragged him up to the barn. It was silent as the priestesses had turned and prayed at the altar, again speaking Latin. The crowd echoed her words, and moments later, the party resumed. What's going to happen to him? Beth asked. He's going to die, Roberto answered. You better get back to the house. The crowd is drunk and angry. Who knows if they'll turn on you too. We can't just let them kill Ryan, I exclaimed. It's too late for him, Roberto said urgently. We need to go, now. Roberto brought us back to the house. He shook his head as soon as we made it inside. I am sorry about your friend, he began, but there is nothing that we can do for him. I don't believe that, Jack put in. Just stay here tonight. Let me speak with them. I don't want you all to be considered a part of the guilty party, Roberto continued. For your safety, promise me you'll stay put. Gilia is a friend of mine and she will keep you safe. If they decide you are just as guilty as Ryan, however, she will side with her people. Oh my God, Beth began to freak out. Why does Ryan have to be so dumb? I will be back, Roberto informed us as he laughed. Well, are we just going to wait around here or are we going to do something? I asked. What can we do? Jack replied. We're outnumbered, outmatched. I think we should listen to Roberto. If we distance ourselves from Ryan, maybe they won't group us together. I can speak in our defense. I can say he was just someone we worked with, but we don't condone what he did. So what? We throw him to the wolves? Beth questioned. Jack frowned. Ryan made his choice. The letter Roberto sent Chloe was pretty clear about how he needed to respect their culture, or else. I wanted to argue, but Jack was right. Still, I wasn't going to give up so easily. I was going to find Ryan one way or another. I waited until everybody had fallen asleep. I sneaked out the bedroom window and I prayed that I didn't wake Gilia. Thankfully, she along with a lot of the villagers were in an alcohol-induced slumber. I managed to creep my way up to the barn that I had seen them drag Ryan into. There were a few men standing guard, but they were passed out from the night's festivities. I didn't want to risk waking them, so I sneaked around back. The smell of animal feces hit me. I covered my nose as I slowly opened the barn door. The pigs squealed at the sound. I froze in place, but after a few seconds, I was confident that no one heard me. I wandered in the barn, looking through the stalls. After passing a few, I had heard a man's labored breathing coming from one. I crept inside and I waited for my eyes to adjust. Ryan, I whispered. Ryan, please let that be you. Chloe? I heard a raspy voice ask. Yes, it's me, I answered. We're getting out of here. I can't move, he croaked. Oh God, it hurts. It hurts so bad. I squinted and finally, I was able to see him clearly. He wasn't Ryan anymore. He was something grotesque. He was on all fours, the palms of his hands now hooves with useless fingers sticking out. Ryan's heels had started to turn too. His body was swollen, and his skin stretched to accommodate. One leg looked broken and limp, while the other was holding his weight. His ears had moved towards the top of his head, and his eyes were further apart. I almost gagged at the sight. Kill me, he begged. Please, kill me. It hurts, Chloe. I backed away, unsure of what I was looking at. Chloe, he said louder. Kill me. With his desperate shouts, I had heard the guards awaken. I began to run back the way that I came, praying that they hadn't seen me. Don't leave me like this, I heard Ryan call out into the distance. I kept going, running as fast as I could, hearing pigs squeal behind me. I made it back to the house to find Beth waiting for me. "Where were you?" she whispered. I didn't reply. What I had seen left me unsettled and horrified. All I did was shake my head. Beth and I did not sleep that night, and the next morning, Jack had met us in our room. I still hadn't moved from my bed. "Are you okay?" Jack asked me. "She hasn't said anything since last night," Beth stated. "She left, and when she had come back, she was like this." "You left? Are you crazy? They could have killed you," Jack exclaimed. "They didn't." I finally spoke. "Well, did you find Ryan? Is he okay?" Beth questioned. I paused. I wasn't sure if I should tell them what I saw. I didn't even want to repeat it. I did find Ryan. He was changed into something. To make matters worse, I just left him there, suffering and alone. "He's dead," I lied. No. Beth's voice trailed off. "God, I'm sorry you had to see that," Jack said softly as he put a hand on my shoulder. "I am too," I replied. "More than you know," I thought. I turned when I saw Roberto enter the room. A solemn look was on his face. We all waited for him to speak, fearful of what news he might bring us. "They said that they will let you live," Roberto began, "but not without conditions." "What conditions?" Jack scoffed. "The priests say Ceres doesn't forget easily," Roberto answered. "You must work for the goddess's forgiveness. You have to stay to help to tend her lands." "I can't stay," I croaked. "I can't." "You don't have a choice. Come now. They are sacrificing the pig early today," Roberto began. "You need to look like you care." I couldn't stop the tears from rolling down my cheeks as we got ready for the day. I was still shaken to my core. The idea of staying in that village another second made me sick. The three of us headed out to view the sacrifice full of sorrow and fear. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. I wondered if the villagers all knew what was going on in the barn. They must have. I watched as they brought the pig out, only for my stomach to drop. The pig had Ryan's gauges and his nose ring. I could feel Beth grab my arm. "They put his piercings on the pig. Why would they do that?" she whispered. "Is this some sort of sick joke?" I was silent. I knew now what Ryan had turned into. I should have known all along. The priestess had called him a pig after all. Beth averted her eyes as one of the priests cut its throat. He then turned to the crowd and made an announcement. He said, "That's the pig they'll be serving during the performance tonight." Jack translated flatly. "That's right. They're putting on a play in Ceres' honor," Beth remembered. It took everything I had not to throw up right there. After we got back to the house, I waited silently for Gilead to head down to the fields. As she did, I turned to Roberto. "I need to speak with you alone," I informed him. "About what?" Jack questioned. "It's none of your business," I snapped, clearly on edge. Jack and Beth had no objections following my outburst. I brought Roberto into the bedroom and made sure the others weren't eavesdropping. "You saw what they do to those who disrespect Ceres, didn't you?" Roberto asked. "Yes, I saw it. That wasn't just a pig," I began, my voice shaking. "That was him, and they expect me to eat him. I can't stay here, I won't, and you know that. How can you even be around these people?" Roberto sighed and was silent for what felt like an eternity. "When I came here, I was a lot like you. I wanted to know everything, he exclaimed. Perhaps some places are better off hidden from the world. I will help you. You better be serious, I hissed. If you get me turned into a pig, I swear to God I'll escape just to maul you to death. You can trust me, he affirmed. I let out a breath of relief. Thank you, I muttered. Come on, we'll discuss a plan with the others, Roberto replied. We had gone over how we would escape 3 or 4 times. During the performance, everybody would be distracted. The 4 of us would need to leave halfway through the play, when the villagers were most likely to let their guard down. We would only need to make it to the outskirts of the village, as those who resided wouldn't dare leave during the festival. It would be a dishonor to Ceres to leave the village before her celebration was over. If we could just make it that far, we would be home free. Our equipment would have to be left behind, but that was a small price to pay for our freedom. Roberto warned us that, since the villagers were on edge, some would be armed with bows. He told us to keep that in mind. That night, we were ready. The 4 of us gathered in the town center with a large group of the village residents to watch the performance. It was about Ceres' origins, but I wasn't paying too much attention. I was nervous. About an hour into the play, I looked around. Everyone was deeply enthralled in the story. I then turned to Roberto and he nodded. Quietly, I stood up and I began to head towards the back. One at a time, the others followed me, and soon we had made it to the edge of the crowd. Do you remember where I parked? Roberto whispered. Jack, Beth, and I nodded, and silently, the 4 of us headed back to the way that we came. It wasn't long before the villagers had caught on to our plan. My heart skipped a beat as we heard a priest yell at the crowd. Run! Jack shouted. The villagers were fast. It took everything I had just to stay ahead of them. My adrenaline was pumping and my heart was pounding as they began to shoot arrows. They missed me only by a centimeter, their projectiles flying right past my head. I paused when I heard Beth scream from behind me. I turned to see that an arrow had punctured her leg. But before I could get to her, Jack grabbed my wrist and dragged me forward. No time! They'll both die! He yelled as I watched them tackle Beth and pour the light green liquid down her throat. Hurry! Roberto called out. I felt an arrow graze my arm and I cried out as I ran. Just a little further, Jack urged me. As we reached the clearing, I realized that they were no longer chasing us. Arrows were still being shot, but somehow we managed to avoid them. Soon, we had made it to Roberto's car. The 3 of us got in, slamming the doors behind us. What about Beth? I sobbed. She drank the elixir, Roberto explained. Her fate has been sealed, just as Ryan's was. Poison? Jack asked. Roberto opened his mouth as if to say something, but no sound came. Instead, he closed it and he started the car. An awful one, I spoke mournfully. God, Jack whispered. Please, just get us out of here. As soon as we were back in the city, we told the local law enforcement what had happened. Even though we pointed out the village's location on a map, for some reason, they were unable to find it. They of course thought that we were responsible. However, with a lack of evidence to tie us to anything, they let us go. Beth and Ryan are still considered missing. Jack and I booked the next flight home, and Roberto told us that he was moving to London, and I haven't heard from him since. Jack and I don't talk about what had happened, and it's for the best. To this day, I can't get the image of Ryan mid-transformation out of my mind. My heart breaks knowing the same thing happened to poor Beth. The thought haunts me, and I'm still plagued with the nightmares. I wished I had never found that village, but you can't change the past. I know dwelling on it won't do me any good. Living in it, however, might just be worse. I work at a small residential psychiatric rehab center. I've been working here since I was only 18 years old, and I'm nearly 30 now. I have a lot of crazy stories that I could tell. Scary ones too. I've had to fight for my life quite a few times. There are only about 12 residents at any given time, and a lot of them end up staying for many years at a time, and so we have pretty strong relationships with most of them. The thing that caused me to gravitate towards this line of work was my own personal experience. My mother was a paranoid schizophrenic, always afraid somebody was watching her to kill her. Her delusions got super intense towards the end of her life. I found her when I was just 12 years old. She had absolutely mutilated herself. Her intestines were strewn, and she had cut so deep into her wrist that she had scratches on her bones. It was the most horrific sight I'd ever seen in my entire life, and the image still haunts me to this day. After that, I vowed to help people like her. I never wanted another kid to find their parents dead like I did. I was sitting in the office around 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Lynn walked back into the office. She had just done the rounds for this hour. She sat at the other computer with a heavy sigh. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Melanie was being weird," she responded. "Weird? How?" I saw Lynn pause to think through her response before answering. She said that a man had been standing in her doorway at night. Melanie has schizophrenia, and so she hallucinates sometimes. This was not an unusual thing for her to say. "She's probably just hallucinating," Lynn continued. "Yeah, probably," I agreed. Lynn grabbed her things to head out. The rest of the night went flawlessly, and I headed home around midnight. I got a call from my supervisor around 9 a.m. the next day. I wasn't scheduled until 6 p.m., so I wasn't sure why he was calling. "Hello?"
"Steve, I need you to come in."
"Is everything okay?" I asked, sitting up in bed, my heart racing a bit. Was I in trouble?
"Melanie tried to kill herself this morning."
"My God, is she okay?" I asked, completely startled at this revelation. Melanie had never shown any suicidal intentions or tendencies at all. She tried to kill herself. It didn't make sense.
"Please, just come in."
My supervisor repeated. "Okay, I'll be there in an hour." I hung up the phone and I got out of bed. The whole ride over, a million thoughts raced through my head. Why? How? When? None of this made any sense. She was fine when Lynn had checked on her last night, and had been sound asleep when I checked on her at 11. I parked my car and I sighed as I prepared myself to walk into work. I wasn't sure what to expect. I headed inside and I went straight to the office. My supervisor, Will, was seated at the far computer. A crying Lynn sat at the other. "What happened?" I asked, taking a seat in between the two of them. Martin found her hanging in her room around 1 this morning. She had made a noose from her bedsheet. It seemed as though he had found her after she had stopped breathing. They're trying to save her. I didn't have the ability to process a response. Not a moment later, one of the other patients, Tim, had busted through our office door. "He's here." Will rolled his eyes slightly. "Who?" Tim had suffered a stroke when he was younger, and it left him with the thinking capacity of a 4-year-old. He couldn't form full sentences. "Him," Tim said with a loudness that made me flinch. "Okay, Tim, we're talking right now. We will come see it in a minute," Will said softly. "Okay," Tim responded and closed the door behind him. Will took a deep breath. "I've been here since this morning, and I don't have anybody to help Lynn cover the day shift. I need you to help her. Martin will come in early tonight, and I'll do the other half of the night shift." I nodded as he stood up and headed towards the door. He paused and looked back. "Please do rounds every half an hour today, just in case." Lynn and I both nodded and Will left. I looked at Lynn after. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," she shrugged. "She was okay yesterday though." "Well, she was being symptomatic," I said. "But she's never done that before." "Yeah," I nodded as I pondered for a moment. I heard Tim yelling from down the hall and I sighed heavily. I'm gonna go see what Tim is going on about. Lynn nodded and turned towards the computer to finish writing her note. I walked down to Tim's room and froze in the hallway. Tim had cut his arm with something. He had drawn on the walls with his own blood. I remember a chill running down my spine as I saw what he put on the wall. "He's here. Tim can't write." I immediately grabbed the first aid kit to fix up his arm. "Tim, why did you do this?" "He did." "Who?" I asked, having my suspicion that it might be Alex down the hall. He had violent tendencies, though usually he left Tim alone. "Him," Tim said, offering no clarification. I sighed as I finished wrapping his arm up. I cleaned up his wall and I headed back to the office. I looked around for Lynn, but I found her nowhere. I sat down and I began notes at my computer. She returned a few minutes later and slumped into her chair. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Victor said he saw something go into Tim's room earlier." I sat up. "Did he say who?" "He couldn't tell." "I just found Tim. His arm was all cut up and somebody had written on the wall with his blood." Lynn sat up as well. "Oh my God, is he okay?" "Yeah, he's fine. Just kept saying that it was him." "Who?" "Just him. I think it may have been Alex." "Yeah, probably," Lynn sighed. "We'll have to go talk to him." I nodded and I finished up my notes until it was time to do rounds again. It was almost lunchtime and most of the residents were awake by now. I checked in on everyone, but only Alex remained in his room sleeping. Victor stepped out to greet me. "Hello, Steve." I turned and smiled. "Hey, Victor, what's up?" Victor shrugged. "Not much. I saw somebody go into Tim's room." "Yeah," I said. "Lynn told me." "Did you see who?" "No, too dark." "The hall?" "Him." Victor had some race-based illusions and really had issues with anybody with a darker complexion. I figured this was manifesting when he saw what I now assumed to be a hallucination go into Tim's room. "Oh, okay, well, thanks for letting us know." I said before going into the kitchen to start lunch. I was making sandwiches when I saw someone enter the room. I didn't look up for a few minutes, but when I did, I saw Alex standing there, just staring. "Hey Alex, is everything okay?" I asked, a little on edge. Alex shook his head, but he said nothing. "What's going on?" I asked again. Alex handed me a drawing that he had done. I took it and I analyzed it greatly. Alex drew a lot to express himself, and he was actually a pretty talented artist. I was surprised to see this drawing though. Alex had drawn a black figure, roughly human-shaped. However, there were tentacles coming out from the torso and long horns on its head. It had no facial features except for a too-wide grin that was filled with razor-sharp teeth. At the top, Alex had written, "He's here." I looked back up at Alex. "What is this?" I asked. "It's him," Alex replied before taking his drawing back and leaving the kitchen. I stood there in shock for a moment before shaking it off and resuming the sandwiches. You see a lot of weird stuff in places like this, and it can be easy to get worked up, but I've learned how to shake things off over the years. It makes the job much more bearable. Everyone came into the kitchen to eat, except for Victor. It wasn't like him to miss a meal, and so I headed to his room to search for him. The scene that I found was nothing short of horrific. Victor had taken the crayons which we had allowed them to have to write in color with and jammed several of them into his eyes. He was writhing in agony on the floor. I ran over and knelt down. "Victor, what did you do?" I couldn't stand to see him anymore. He cried out as I pulled my cell phone out and I called 911. He continued to cry out as I stayed on the phone, waiting for an ambulance. They hauled him away, and I sighed deeply as Lynn came up behind me. "What a day," she said softly. I chuckled lightly and I walked off to do my rounds, trying to take my mind off of everything. I went into Renee's room at the end of the hall. Renee was very sociable and was only diagnosed with anxiety and depression. Of course, it was debilitating at the level she felt these things, but she did not hallucinate, which is the most important. She was gone at some doctor appointment with her mother, so she wasn't in there. I paused when I found a journal laying open on her desk. A similar picture to the one Alex had drawn was scribbled on the page, along with a short note. "He will come for all of us. He's here." I looked around the room, but I saw nothing out of place. Renee seemed to be living like she always had, but this journal entry was troubling. I only had a few hours left in my shift and I just wanted to relax. Everyone seemed okay and I headed to the office. I completed some notes before taking off for the day. I went home, anxious about working the following night. I hadn't heard anything more about Victor, but I hoped that he would be okay. Renee hadn't returned when I had left either. I went to bed and I got a pretty restless night of sleep. I dragged myself out of bed around noon the next day and mentally prepared myself to go to work. I got dressed and I started my meal prep for my lunch. It was almost 5 when I headed out of the door for work. I arrived to find Lynn in the office. She looked up as I came in the door. "Hey, what's up?" I said, sitting my lunchbox down on my desk. "Renee still isn't home. She must have stayed at her mom's." I nodded. "And Victor?" She shrugged. "I haven't heard anything." I nodded and I sat back in the chair as Lynn gathered her things and left. I hoped it would be a quiet night. I was alerted to screaming around 10 p.m. I ran out of the office to find a hysterical Marie in the hall. "Marie, what's going on?" "I don't want to go," she yelled, curling up in a ball on the floor. Other residents began to poke their heads out of the rooms. "Go where?" I asked softly, trying to remain neutral and calm. "With him. I don't want to," she cried. I knelt down beside her and helped her up. "You aren't going anywhere," I said softly as I led her back to her room. I helped her into bed and I gave her a Xanax to help her calm down. She sniffled and she relaxed a bit. "He's here," she whispered before falling asleep. I returned to the office. Marie never woke up again. Apparently, she had some undiagnosed heart condition that had stopped her heart the night before. A freak thing, they had said. The next day, we had a small memorial with the residents for Marie. It was at that time that my supervisor got a call. He stepped out of the room to take it. He was gone a few minutes before he came back in, looking as pale as a ghost. He pulled Lynn, Martin, and I aside and spoke in a hushed tone. That was Renee's father. Her and her mother got into a car accident after Renee's appointment. They both died on impact. Lynn gasped and Martin and I took deep breaths. What was going on around here? This would be hard news for the residents to hear, especially after losing Marie not a day ago. Lynn shed some tears and excused herself to the office, as Martin and I put on braced faces to finish the memorial. The following day, we received word that Melanie had succumbed to her injuries as well. 3 residents had died in a week. I had been there for 11 years and only saw one person die the entire rest of the time. Victor was released from the hospital, but they weren't able to save his eyes. He spent days locked up in his room, not coming out for anything. Weeks passed and all of the residents began to mention this mysterious him. I had found "He's here" written nearly everywhere I looked. In the mirror with toothpaste, on the walls with crayon, even on the dining table with peas. Lynn began to act stranger as the weeks went on. I figured the stress of recent events had gotten to her. She sat down at her computer. "He's here." "Who?" "Him. The thing everyone sees," she said, almost frantic. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath and looked over at me. "Him. He's dark, not a human. He says he wants to take me home." I raised my eyebrows in disbelief. "Lynn, are you good? Maybe you need to take some time off." "I know what I saw." I held up my hands in defense and I didn't say anything more. Lynn shot herself after work that evening. She had never struggled with any mental illnesses and was one of the happiest people that I'd known. Time went on and more residents had encounters with him. I had never seen anything, and neither had Martin. We didn't know what was going on, but the residents were all scared. We decided that it may be best to move them to a new facility. Changing the environment can sometimes help delusions and those sort of things. I had just woken up around 5 a.m. when I saw that I had a text from Martin from a few minutes earlier. It only said 2 words. "He's here." I tried calling him, but he wouldn't answer. I rushed to work to find the building completely engulfed in flames. I called 911 and they raced over as fast as they could. It wasn't fast enough. There were no survivors. They said that they weren't sure how the fire had started, but believed that it could have been arson. I had known Martin for nearly 10 years. He didn't do this. I had lost nearly everyone I knew in just a few short months. And to top it all off, as I was driving home, I thought I saw the silhouette in my back seat. I looked back again, but there was nothing there. I'm terrified for my life because I fear this thing is real. I feel like there's one last thing you should know that will clarify my fear even more. My mother left a suicide note all those years ago. On it, only 2 words. He's here. I'm always grateful to read posts from others explaining the rules of particular places. A library where you mustn't interrupt the girl in the reflective jacket who reads collected ESVM poems to herself until midnight. A campsite where you must politely offer some of your food to the faceless people who visit your campfire. An old house where you mustn't look out the window if you hear the sound of bells. Particular places have particular rules. It might be because they're ancient, special, haunted, cursed, or just particularly beautiful places for other things to make their homes. Sometimes, you can learn a little from reading others' lists. Others hard-won knowledge of what is or isn't safe. But spirits are petty and varied. One will tear at your tongue if you speak to it. Another will kill you for rudeness if you don't. It takes an expert on the area to know. I don't live anywhere quite like that. I live in the old part of Edinburgh. There's nothing cursed or ancient about my flat. It's actually probably one of the least supernatural places in the city. It's safe. Cities often don't have guardians in quite the same way that rural places have. Forests, lakes, valleys, even big ranches. They'll have owners or rangers or guardians, often passed down through generations, or trained and picked carefully by mentors. I like talking to people from those wild places. The guardians, rangers, and owners of forests and lakes and valleys. I respect the hell out of their attitude. Their reverence for the places they watch over. I don't have anything that special. I stumbled into this. I'll tell you that story if you're patient. And while I would rather die than be impolite to something really ancient and fey, sometimes in cities, what you're actually dealing with is a vomit nymph or a minor cocaine spirit, and that's occasionally hard to take seriously. But I'm lucky. I tend not to need specific rules. Of course, there are places like the bridge you mustn't walk under if your voice doesn't echo. And Arthur's Seat has its fair share of terrifying things. But for the most part, I'm only really concerned by the universal rules. The ones that pretty much apply anywhere, whether it be an ancient haunted cathedral or the most mundane cafe. If you're hurrying home between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., don't look behind you. Make sure your bed has your head further from the door than your feet, and ensure at least one side, preferably 2, is against the wall. If you're walking past a room and see a person out of the corner of your eye, but when you check again, it's just an outfit on a coat hanger, don't freak out. But always make sure to check again. Break at least one solemn promise before about mid-February of each year. Close your closet door firmly before sleeping. It's okay if it cracks open, so long as it's too narrow for a finger. Stay under your blanket when you sleep. Having a leg out of the blanket is okay, but don't position your feet where they could be seen from under your bed. Windows can slide upwards or open outwards, but must never ever open inwards. If you feel the intense sensation that somebody is watching you from the window, ideally close the curtains. You can look from your bed or couch, but never go over to the window and look down, and never ever press your face against the glass. Only certain people are safe to sleep in complete darkness. You'll know instinctively if you're one of the ones who needs to keep a light on or a window open. Don't sleep with someone until you've had at least 3 dates. They can't maintain a good consistent mimic for more than 2 evenings, and so after 3, you're safe. On a midwinter morning, whichever date you personally celebrate as your winter festival, ensure there's at least one sock in your home that has no pair. There's more, but I don't need to tell you them. See, the universal rules have become part of us now. Either they're in our biology, things we've known from birth without needing to be taught them, or they're aspects of culture that get most people to obey them without knowing why they're doing it. Some of them, I think, aren't actually universal. For instance, I think the rule that you must offer tea, specifically tea, to strangers in your home is only on this island. The creatures that demand it only really live here. I think some of the rules are culturally dependent, because of course, an arbitrary calendar day isn't actually how most non-humans count New Year. It's about the rhythms of your life, and the points in those rhythms where certain things might pay attention to you. Edinburgh doesn't really have many rules that you wouldn't get elsewhere. Not rules that apply to all of it. You get some heckin' specific rules if you're working in certain parts of the castle at 3 a.m. But really, it's just a matter of common sense. It's a very old city. An important city. Scotland is an old, wild country, and it remembers all sorts of things. It's a beautiful city with so many layers to it, and so many ghosts. There are things here you wouldn't imagine. But you don't have to tap on anything 7 times. And if you order a kebab from the man with a tattoo of a swarm of wasps after taking the last train from Glasgow, look, you didn't know how bad a decision that was, but you damn well knew it was a bad idea. At this point, you're probably wondering who the hell I am. I certainly don't have any official position. I don't own any land here. I'm not descended from anyone, and I'm not trained as police or anything. Actually, no human picked me. It seemed random. The night after I moved here, almost 16 years ago, I had the most fantastically vivid dream. I was dancing with the most beautiful woman that I had ever seen. She had flame red hair and wore a tattered copper dress. She danced with a sword in each hand, but I was unafraid. She moved with such clarity of intent, and she inspired me so much with her grace that I was able to fluidly move around her in perfect timing, and the blades never touched me. I had never danced in my life, and I can't dance when I'm awake, but she had moved me. That's all I can explain. I was woken up by a knocking on my door. It was the same woman. I admit, after our dance, I'm feeling a little famished, she said. I invited her in for eggs and bacon. In hindsight, that was stupid. Most magic runs on rules and rituals, and the laws of thresholds. Home sanctity and hospitality are some of the oldest of all. There are plenty of things out there which only need an invite into your home to destroy you. But I'm glad I did it. She didn't touch the eggs and bacon, but she told me it was kind and a respectful offer. The first thing she told me was about Waverly. Well, no. Actually, the first thing she told me was that I needed to get a new coffee machine, because my old one was going to break in about 5 more coffees. The second thing she told me was that, before getting on a train to Sterling, I should check to see if there's a stop at Silvery. There's no Silvery on the line to Sterling. At least, not unless I'm at the station. I've checked with friends who've confirmed this. It's only there when I am, as far as I know. It's safe for me to get off at Silvery. I have an invitation. It is not safe for you, and you should not try. I saw a teenager try it once, and another man who was probably just counting stops to his normal one, and didn't look up from his phone as he got off. That's another one of those stories you can ask me for. Anyway, my day job is at an office and I do things with spreadsheets. It's just, in my spare time, I'm one of the people who helps with the rules. There's actually a fair few of us, with as many people and other beings as there are in a big city, but I don't know the others. And I'm writing all of this because apparently some people don't know all of the rules. They just didn't get it somehow. Their parents didn't teach them, or their instincts are all wrong. And so I figured I should write something that explains them. Some of them are obvious. You fucking know why your closet door must never be wide enough cracked open for a long gray finger to curl out from inside and wrap itself slowly around the door. If you don't, please, just imagine your reaction were you to see that. Congrats. Now you know. Some of them you think you learned better about. You didn't. Adults know it's safe to put your feet on the cracks between the paving stones, but that doesn't mean children are wrong about it being dangerous. The edgelings only take small, tender victims, but some are counterintuitive. George, a local nurse and one of the other part-time guardians, called me up yesterday. That was the call that had prompted this post. He told me about an awfully weird occurrence at the hospital. Apparently, an elderly patient reported waking up at around 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, hearing nothing but perfect silence. She looked at the door, and in walked a sort of, I hesitate to call it a man. Apparently, it had arms that were far too long and dragged on the floor, only a gaping bloody hole where its eye should be, and a torso that wrapped around in spirals like a knotted rope. The man stopped in the doorway, breathing heavily, and then reached out with one hand. It seemed like his feet couldn't pass the doorway, apparently, but his hands could. Walking his fingers across the floor, and then eventually taking a deep breath and supporting the full weight of that awfully long arm, he groped along the beds of the ward until he reached hers. When he touched her feet, his hands weren't cold. They were warm, slimy, a little suctiony. Something told her to remain perfectly still, not to react, not to give any sign of life. The moist, heavy fingers explored her toes a little, lifted her heel and then dropped her foot. The long-armed creature sighed heavily. "No tasty eyes here," it whined. "Need tasty eyes." It took a deep breath, coughed up some slime, and then whimpered like a child begging for ice cream. "Delicious eyes." And then it left. Apparently the doctors think the woman's crazy, and there's absolutely no sign of the creature on the hospital's CCTV. No slime where it supposedly coughed. But George is the nurse that helps old people get cleaned up, and he says that her feet were sticky, in a way that turned his stomach. and George's stomach is strong enough to clean pus out of the guy who decided to stick his dick up the open surgical wounds in his own arm, and then laugh about it over a pint. George mentioned he's damn glad his patient was sleeping with her head and her eyes away from the door, and her feet towards it. He's made sure it's hospital policy to ask all patients to sleep that way. I thought it might be valuable to let you all know. The streetlights had become few and far between. Every passing burst of light illuminating the interior of our 1997 Toyota Camry and driving us onward to our destination. My father liked to drive in silence, almost trance-like. His personal meditation only broken by the occasional cigarette. I occupied the passenger seat in my silence with the company of my cell phone. The relationship with my father was largely like this the past 2 months, after losing my mother to breast cancer. And neither of us able to share our grief with the other. It was left to fester. Maybe that was one of the reasons Dad had decided to just quit his job at the machine factory and uproot me in the middle of my junior year of high school. Whatever his reasons for relocating us to Maine and taking on a role as a lighthouse keeper, I was sure that it wouldn't heal our broken family. I got my first glimpse of the lighthouse on the horizon, from behind the dusty glare of the windshield. I guessed that it was close to 70 feet tall, and just as old, if not older. The outside was solid stone and mortar, no frills or decoration. The top came to an equally unimpressive and plain crown shape. The lighthouse was situated on a jutting peninsula maybe a half-mile wide and 2 miles long, ending in a 50-foot cliff face on the ocean. Our new home. I think my dad saw the look of apprehension on my face. "Jake, I know this is a big change from the city, and Lord knows we both have been through enough recently. I know how hard this is moving and leaving all your friends behind, but I think this will be good for us. A chance to start new and make new opportunities," he said as he exhaled a cloud of smoke. "No, I understand, Dad. Whatever you think is best," I replied. I didn't want to upset him, even though I felt as lonely as the lighthouse looked. We returned to our normal silence over the next 30 minutes as we made our way through our new town, Cape Heights. My mood continued to sink during our trip through town. Cape Heights offered little in the way of entertainment or shopping. The town seemed to have barely made it into the 21st century. And Dad lit another cigarette as we finally pulled into the small gravel patch as the lighthouse that acted as a parking lot. We parked next to an old Chevy box truck that seemed to be more rust than truck. As we exited the car, we were greeted by the caretaker, a tall graying man leaving the lighthouse. "Morning, folks. You must be Paul." My dad shook his hand and flicked his cigarette out. "Yes, sir. I'd like to introduce my son, Jake." "Nice to meet you, sir," I said as I shook his hand. "Call me Sam," was all he said. I guess Sam had to be in his early 60s. He was close to 6 feet tall with shaggy gray and brown hair, a thick mustache, and eyes like stormy seas. He was wearing a faded brown jacket and faded blue jeans. On first impression, he looked like a man raised on the seas. Sam invited us into the lighthouse for a tour and to explain the responsibilities of Dad's new job. The inside of the lighthouse was surprisingly modern, with an open floor plan and 3 big bay windows that face the water from the ground floor. The kitchen was retrofitted with new appliances and granite countertops and a landline phone. There is a fully stocked pantry, as well as a food cellar full to bursting. The dining room had a solid oak table, china cabinet, and even a mini chandelier. The living room had a 50-inch TV and a comfortable leather couch to watch it from. I would even be happy with my bedroom once I hung up some posters. I began to think maybe living here wouldn't be so bad after all. After showing us the basic living quarters, Sam took us to the top of the lighthouse. "You get used to walking these steps after a while," he commented. "Doesn't ever get easier, but it gets familiar. I've walked these stairs plenty of times over the last 20 years as a caretaker. Know each of them by heart." As we continued upward, Sam told us the history of the lighthouse. "I suppose I'll start with the history of Cape Heights. The land the town is on originally was settled by Native Americans known as the Red Paint People. Those original people claimed this land was sacred, and the waters off the coast as well. Claimed there were spirits in the water and other things as well. Some old, deep magic. They lost this land to the French sometime in the 1600s. The French claimed they fought like devils, all covered in red war paint, fighting with weapons made of bone from other conquered native tribes. They eventually lost though. Bone just doesn't hold up to steel weapons. The land then went back and forth between the English and French until the English kicked them out for good and made it a colony. The lighthouse was erected just after the Revolutionary War, when more ships started coming from farther up north, taking fish and lumber down south. After a number of trading ships began to disappear off the coast, the new Americans decided to build this lighthouse. The lighthouse has weathered many a storm since then and never has her light extinguished, except for once. Every caretaker and keeper has been charged with that duty, to always keep the light shining. Once we had reached the top, Sam explained the light to my dad. The light now is all electrical. The housing consisted of 6 huge bulbs that rotated on a giant plate enclosed by lenses on all sides. Sam explained how it all worked. I grew bored quickly, only listening long enough to gather there were a breaker box downstairs in the kitchen, where the power switch was. A switch for the foghorn, and that the most maintenance required by us would be changing out a bulb every once in a while or flipping a breaker. I daydreamed while staring at the ocean until my dad's call for me to join them interrupted my thoughts. We all headed back down the stairs in the kitchen. "Now that I've given you the proper tour and explained the basics of how the light works, you should be good to go. But I would be remiss to not leave you fellas with 2 more things," Sam said. "I told you the light has never gone out except for once. Even if you see no ships, you must keep that light going. That light is the difference between life and death, and you are the keeper of that light, the protector of life. That light must never run out. The town depends on it. If it does, darkness comes and hell with it." His last statement filled me with unease, and I could tell it made my dad uneasy as well. "Secondly," Sam continued, "as I've explained, the maintenance is easy enough. You know where replacement bulbs and parts are, as well as the food stocks in the cellar. I've left my number on the fridge as well as a list of rules that you must follow. This list is vital in keeping the lighthouse operating as it should, and keeping y'all both safe. Do not deviate from this list, and follow all instructions to the letter. And with that, Sam left us and assured us that he would be back in a week to check on us and our supplies. What was all that about darkness and hell coming with it, and the town depending on the light? I asked Dad. I don't know, he said as he drew a cigarette from his pack. But he seemed pretty serious about it. Must have caused a shipwreck when the lights went out before. Small towns remember things like that. Accidents here affect more people aren't as easily forgotten like in the city. Yeah, I guess so. After Sam's cryptic warnings, I was curious to see the rules that he left. Dad grabbed the paper from the magnet on the fridge and we read it together. 1. You must keep the light lit from dusk until dawn at all costs. 2. At dusk, you must lock all doors and windows. Do not leave the lighthouse until dawn. 3. You may hear cries for help coming from the bottom of the cliff. Ignore them and do not respond. 4. If you see a ship with 3 red sails on the horizon at dusk, sound the foghorn 3 times. 5. Always make your bed within 5 minutes of waking up in the morning. 6. Do not make a phone call or answer the phone after 8 p.m. for any reason. Dad and I stared at each other after we both finished reading the list. Neither of us sure what to say. This can't be serious, I said. Most of these rules make no sense. What's gonna happen if I don't make my bed? What if there's an emergency at night and I can't call 911? There has to be some reason that Sam left us these rules. After all, he's been a caretaker for 20 years. Let's just do our best to follow them. Okay, son. I want us to start fresh out here. Maybe we can both find some peace here. Lord knows that we both need it. I love you, Jake. Can you try for me? I smiled gently at my dad and I agreed to give it my best effort. I still had my doubts though, and Sam's list of rules on top of his earlier warnings had made me curious. I had the feeling that there was more to this lighthouse than the caretaker let on, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I reread the list for what felt like the 20th time that night. My head pounded from straining my eyes as well as the soft but constant buzz from the desk lamp. I could hear my dad snoring from the next bedroom, exhausted from the drive and preparing the lighthouse for our first night. He assured me that the light was in tip-top shape, and it would cut through the surrounding darkness. I couldn't sleep. Something about this list and Sam's warnings that nagged at me. My gut was telling me that there is a connection somewhere. I stared at my old digital radio clock and watched the red lines change from 11:23 to 11:24. Lost in my thoughts about old native ghost stories and magic. A ringing startled me as I nearly jumped out of my skin as the telephone reverberated through the lighthouse. I froze, thinking of Sam's list. I heard something else, barely audible over the deafening phone. Footsteps. I was too late. Dad was shuffling, still half asleep towards the phone, more on autopilot than conscious. Hello? I heard him mutter into the receiver, sleep still thick in his voice. No, it's not possible. Susan? My heart dropped to my stomach, and my stomach jumped to my throat. I couldn't breathe. My mother, Susan Thompson, was dead and buried. I saw the light fade from her eyes and the dirt cover her casket. This wasn't possible. Who was my father speaking to? I stared at the ceiling of my bedroom, more numb than I felt the first time I saw the lighthouse. I could tell Dad was awake from the overwhelming silence that had replaced the usual bear-like snores. That feeling in my gut I had ever since reading those damn rules was back with a vengeance. I knew I couldn't be mad at Dad. He didn't mean to break the rules. At 52 years of age, answering a phone call in the middle of the night isn't a rule one would normally have, nor a rule with such a cruel punishment if broken. I couldn't take it anymore. I took the list of rules into the kitchen to reread again over a glass of milk I was hopeful would calm me down. My father's presence in the kitchen was only betrayed by the glow of his cigarette, faintly outlining his face in the dark. "I'm sorry, Jake. I messed up." "Dad," I started. "No, Jake, I'm serious. I was the one that moved us all the way out here, upended our lives, took you away from the only home that you've known, disconnected you from all of your friends." He paused to pull the drag deep into his lungs, holding it in briefly before letting it escape from his nose. "And what did I do it for? I've hurt you just as much as your mother's loss has. I haven't been there for you. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm sorry I broke the rules on the list. I was the one that was so adamant that we follow them. I don't know why I answered the thing. A habit, I suppose, still. I don't know what kind of sick person would pull a prank like that. First thing in the morning, we're packing up and we're getting out of this place." "No, we can't." The words were already gone before I realized what I had said. "Dad, I love you and it's not all your fault. I've been pretty distant too since Mom passed. But we're here now, for whatever reason. Fate, destiny, or just crappy luck. We're here for a reason. Maybe we can find that peace that you were talking about." "Are you sure, son? I know you've been pretty hesitant about this whole situation from the beginning. Why the sudden desire to stay, especially after?" I struggled to find words to explain it to him, and also myself. After everything, I should be ready to go. I should already be 1 foot out of the door. My brain was racing to connect the dots, while my gut still warned me something was seriously wrong. "It just feels like we're meant to be here," was all that I could manage. I spent the remaining hours until dawn in the company of the lights atop the lighthouse. I watched the waves break in whitecaps on the cliff face below. The list was not far from my mind. Thankfully, no phantom voices or ghostly ships bothered me. Watching the sun slip into the heavens and the stars retreat, my mind went back to what Sam had said about the natives that once lived there. That old, deep magic lurking in the ocean. Spirits. It was too much that I needed more information. What happened the time that the light had went out? Why does the town depend on the light? Lighthouses protected ships in the open ocean, not people in their homes on land. I could see all of the dots, but I just couldn't connect them. Not yet. Once the sun had fully cleared the distant horizon and the last of the fog cleared, I borrowed Dad's car and I left for the library. Cape Heights was an average as small towns could be. As the Camry hummed down the main drag, I was able to take in more of the town than I had on our first trip through. Cape Heights offered not a single Walmart, 7-Eleven, or any major retailer. Mom and pop shops dotted both sides of the street, providing the residents with anything a supermarket could, minus the convenient one-stop location. I noticed a pharmacy, a baker, a dental office, and the only gas station in town, displaying a faded wooden sign for petrol. I finally found the library 2 blocks behind the post office. I entered the library and I made my way to the front desk. "Can I help you?" The elderly woman in front of me was the stereotypical librarian. Horn-rimmed glasses, tight gray curls in her hair, thin pursed lips and eyes that hadn't smiled in years, maybe decades. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Jake and me and my father just moved into the Lighthouse. He took up the post of lighthouse keeper." The caretaker Sam gave us a quick history of the town and the lighthouse. It interested me and I wanted to learn more about it. Sam mentioned something about the light going out once. Would there be any periodicals from that time? I offered. The look I got was hot daggers cutting through ice. "Periodicals are in the back room, and town history is in the local government section," she replied curtly. I spent the entire day in that library. My eyeballs felt like they were ready to explode from all the squinting. Cape Heights Library boasted a very nearly complete history of their town. I found numerous copies of French and English maps from the various times that they held the land, transcripts of diaries of early settlers, accounts of battles and skirmishes with the red paint natives, and even translated oral histories, beliefs and legends of those early natives. The two most important pieces of information that I discovered concerned the lighthouse itself and the night that the light had extinguished. The history of the lighthouse was accurate to what Sam had told us, except for the history of the keepers. Town employee records as far back as the town was founded listed every lighthouse keeper to man that light station, and not one single keeper manned his post for more than 3 months. Every keeper to man the station disappeared into thin air. The caretakers all reported coming to check on them and to bring fresh provisions, only to find that light shining and the lighthouse empty. Finding information on the night that the light had went out proved to be more difficult. Searching the periodicals proved to be exhausting work, but I finally found what I was looking for. In 1963, on a cold August night, the light had went out. The caretaker at the time, Charles Vanderbooth, had left the lightkeeper with fresh provisions and in generally good spirits that night. But somehow within the following 15 minutes after the caretakers departed the lighthouse, it fell dark. Shortly after that, a storm hit at Cape Heights, only lasting a reported 10 minutes and not being out of the ordinary for the season. None of this in and of itself is particularly newsworthy. It was what was discovered the morning after that was. The following morning, the citizens of Cape Heights awoke to find that 75% of the town had disappeared. Homes were searched and no signs of foul play were detected. Clothing, wallet, jewelry were all found in their rightful places. Dinner was found cold on a set dining room table. The citizens had no explanation for it, and it was as if friends, family, and neighbors had simply disappeared overnight. The only clue was a strange inscription found on a rock near the lighthouse by the caretaker in his search for the keeper, strangely Native American in appearance. I pushed the Camry as hard as it would go, racing back to the lighthouse. I almost had all the dots connected, but something still eluded me. There was still something missing. It didn't matter. The lighthouse, Cape Heights, and Sam's list. Not a single person who was keeper was ever seen again. I wasn't letting that happen to my dad. We had to get out of here. I barreled into the parking lot and sprinted towards the door. Dusk was beginning to settle and I wouldn't risk breaking another rule. I locked the door behind me and I quickly checked all the windows. The phone rang again. The clock on the wall read 8:01 p.m. I unplugged the phone from the wall, but it kept ringing. "Dad!" I yelled. "Dad, I need to talk to you. I found some answers. We have to leave at dawn. We are leaving Cape Heights." Silence answered by calls. I knew Dad was here. I'd had the car all day. He said he was going to try and relax today and recoup from the previous night's events. I checked the light first, fearing that a malfunction had occurred and he was in the dark trying to fix it. After the light proved operational in its solitude, I moved back downstairs, still calling his name. I caught it out of the corner of my eye, through the cracked door leading to my room. My bed was a mess. I had forgot to make it this morning, and I left my father all alone in the lighthouse. And then I heard it, coming from the 3 bay windows facing the cliff face and the tumultuous waters below. "Help! Please, somebody help me!" The sound of my father's voice was unmistakable. I wouldn't even have found out about this if it hadn't been for my strange fears and paranoia. For as long as I can remember, I had been deathly afraid of sleeping alone. One of the starkest memories of my childhood is lying flat on my back in bed, feeling too scared to close my eyes, thinking that if I do, someone will appear next to me. The weirdest thing is that I never imagined this monster or whatever harming me in any way. It would always just lay on its side, watching me, with shining, unblinking eyes, and I would be too afraid to do anything, to move or to scream. This helplessness that I would supposedly feel in an imaginary situation like that pretty much destroyed my childhood. It had gotten so bad that I would scream and thrash around like a brat well into my teenage years if I was ever forced to sleep alone. Until I was 10 years old, I would sleep in my parents' bedroom on a separate cot next to their bed. And then, up to my 14th birthday, I would force one of my parents to sleep next to me. And considering that I was raised in India, therapy wasn't even an option. But that didn't mean that my parents didn't try to help get me over these fears. They tried sleeping next to me and sneaking out in the middle of the night, or sitting next to my bed and waiting until I fell asleep. But none of it worked. I would always wake up, sweating and scared out of my wits in the middle of the night, whenever they tried to do this. I would then immediately scamper off to their bedroom and wake them up by whispering how scared I was, almost giving them a heart attack in the process. If I had to guess, these fears started when I was 8 years old, when my grandma gave me a doll of a clown that always made me so uncomfortable. This was a clown from the TV horror show, Whoa, and then my smartass dad made me watch around the same time, thinking that I was too young to be affected by this stuff. He found out how wrong he was when I started screaming like a banshee when my grandma gave me that doll. My problems at night started soon after. I couldn't for the life of me close my eyes without thinking somebody was going to be there when I turned around. On my 14th birthday, my parents finally put down their foot and forced me to sleep alone. I cried and I pleaded, tried to justify that I wasn't really a scared little boy and that my fears were rational, but none of it worked. And so I finally started sleeping alone. And this is when I developed my strange rituals. I would drink exactly 2 glasses of water every night 2 hours before bedtime, so that I neither feel thirsty nor do I have to get up to pee at night. I would then make sure all the doors leading outside were closed, draw the curtains, and keep the bathroom light switches on. Definitely the most important part of my nighttime rituals was keeping the pillows in a straight line, next to where I slept, to block off space for any monster trying to sleep next to me. It took me months before I finally got used to sleeping alone. I wasn't comfortable by any means, but I would at least not be painfully sleepy the next day. going to college was a godsend. I had a single bed in a tiny room, surrounded by hundreds of noisy boys like me. While many others found it irritating, that noise was like a lullaby to me, doing the job of a therapist. After graduation, I came back to my parents' house and began preparing to take exams for government jobs. And my ritual started right back up, as if nothing had changed. But I was at least sleeping a little bit better. It all came to a head when I got a job and I moved into my own government-owned house with a double bed at the age of 26, just a couple of weeks ago. As my bedtime approached, I followed all of my rituals. I drank my water, closed all of the doors, drew the curtains, arranged the pillows, and slept comfortably. Things changed the next morning. When I woke up, I found that my pillows weren't there. They were neatly placed, one on top of the other, on the side table. The most terrifying thing about this was that it wasn't anything new. This had been happening all throughout my childhood. Each morning, the pillows I had carefully placed next to me would be gone. I had always assumed that it was one of my parents who had done this, especially my father, who was an early riser. But I was living alone now, and all my doors were locked when I checked them in the morning. I initially dismissed this, thinking that I might have forgotten to place them next to me last night. I was actually quite happy with this, as it looked like I was finally getting over my fears. But this happened again the next day, and the next and the day after that. All of the fears of my childhood were back, stronger than ever. I was back to staying awake like an owl, only dozing off for a maximum of half an hour or so each night. And the pillows would be gone from the bed every morning. It was hell. Now, I wasn't a kid anymore, so I didn't just assume that something supernatural was happening here. I tried to act like an adult, to think rationally, even as I was too scared to even tilt my head to the left when lying down in bed. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe that's how those pillows were moved at night all throughout my life. It was not something my parents knew about, however, and they instead chastised me for being so cowardly as a grown-ass man. But I needed answers, and so I went out and I got a video camera and I placed it next to my bed. It was what I found in the video that made me write this. I wasn't sleepwalking. It was my fears, my imaginations, my nightmares. They were real. My knees were trembling as I saw the strange man phase through my bedroom door. He picked up the pillows, neatly placed them on the side table, and laid down next to me. I jumped as he looked directly into the camera, with shining, unblinking eyes. I fast-forwarded the video, and he stayed there for hours, just looking at the camera, not moving even an inch. Before I woke up, he simply got up and walked away, disappearing through the closed bedroom door. I am beyond terrified. I don't know what's happening, what that thing is, and why it's doing this, or even if my life is in danger. I need help. I need this to end if I'm ever going to get a wink of sleep again. Please, guys, help me. The first thing I did after posting this was checking into the busiest hotel in Ranchi, thinking that if I could recreate the environment of my college, I would be rid of that thing, at least temporarily, and finally get a good night's sleep. And so I moved into the busiest, rowdiest hotel that I could find, bang in the middle of the city, after specifically asking for a room with a single bed. As I settled in, I went through my phone. After reading your comments, I went out and I bought a bag of salt, using it to draw a boundary around my bed. A couple of weeks ago, I would have laughed at anybody trying to do something like this, but I was now desperately beyond the point of caring and would do just about anything to make this end. The me from 2 weeks ago didn't know he was being haunted by something that could walk through walls. A lot of you seem to think that this entity haunting me was benign and may even have been protecting me. I have no way of knowing that, and it's not something that I could just assume, considering that the opposite of that was just as likely to be true and that my life was really in danger. All I really wanted to do was to sleep without a monster in my bed. Some of you even suggested that I should try and get with the thing, and I'll admit it, I laughed at that one, and boy did I need that. For those of you wondering why I didn't just get somebody to sleep next to me or get a dog, it really isn't that easy. I had just moved to a new town for my job and I hardly knew anybody there. Inviting them into my bedroom would mean sexual harassment charges, and what would be the point of getting a dog? The barking would wake me up when I wanted to sleep, and besides, I really wasn't in the right headspace to be raising an animal. Next, I tried to send the video I took to my parents and friends, and even thought about uploading it to YouTube. And here's where it gets freaky. Every single time, the video just turned to pure static. I mean, I could watch it on my camera, but every attempt at transferring it to another device resulted in a complete failure. I tried playing the video on my camera and recording the camera on my phone, but even that didn't work. The camera screen seemed to be showing static on the video that I was trying to shoot on my phone, even as the video continued to play on the damn camera. I felt like I was losing my mind. Dejected, I had almost decided that maybe I was going through a mental breakdown when I heard a knock on my door. Room service. The look of shock on that man's face when he saw the video sent relief flooding through my body. I wasn't crazy. This was real. I sent him away with a hefty tip and some lame excuse about an experimental horror movie that I was trying to film in my bedroom, and I settled in for the night. A faint smell of cigarettes lingered in the stale and musky air of the hotel room as I lay in my back, gazing up at the rusting ceiling fan. I was exhausted. Every cell in my body was crying out, wanting me to fall asleep, but it just didn't happen. I was teetering on the edge of consciousness the entire night, frightened out of my mind. I counted sheep, concentrated on the sounds outside, meditated while lying down, but nothing worked. I kept imagining the man waltzing through the walls and sitting down on the couch at the foot of my bed and staring at me throughout the night. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I was imagining it. I didn't think I slept for even a second the whole night, but when sunlight came streaming in through the windows and I got out of my bed, my whole world had turned upside down. The saw line that I had carefully drawn around my bed had been broken in one place. Shit. It was taunting me. It was letting me know that it could get to me anywhere. And not just that, but that it had been doing this for the last 18 years non-stop. I had never been alone, not even back in college. Why didn't I ever find out that he was there back then? Granted, I was a bit of a slob back then, but surely it couldn't have been so bad. The stress and lack of sleep was getting to me at this point, and my head began to pound like it never had before. I trudged downstairs to the hotel canteen and chugged 2 cups of just the trashiest coffee and contemplated my next move. What can I do to make this stop? As I ordered breakfast, my thoughts kept circulating back to that infernal doll my grandmother had given me. Whatever was happening to me, it had started back when my dad made me watch that show, Whoa, and my grandma gave me a doll that looked exactly like that psychotic clown who murdered people by shoving garlands down their throats. Now that I had spoken to my parents and based off of their reactions, I didn't think they had an inkling of what I was going through. They told me that they had thrown the doll away when I had that hysterical tantrum and have no idea what the hell happened to it. And so they left my nanny. Maybe she had inadvertently given me a cursed object. Maybe she even knows what was happening here. I took out my phone and I dialed her number. She picked up the third time that I had called her.
Hello?
Her weak and raspy voice came from the other side.
Who is this?
Nanny, it's me, Aditya, I replied. She was overjoyed at hearing my voice and launched into a long, one-sided conversation, asking me how I was doing, and then complaining about how I never visit even before I could answer, and then meandering on to some random gossip about her neighbors. Nanny, I cut her off. This isn't a social call. I really need your help.
Help? What do you need?
She asked. Do you remember that doll you gave me when I was 8? Where did you get it? I questioned and I waited a full 30 seconds before she responded.
Why are you asking about that?
She asked softly. Strange things have been happening to me recently, Nanny, and I think that doll has something to do with it. I just need to... Hello? Hello? She had cut the call. At some level, I was angry that she hung up on me, but more than anything, I was relieved. Relieved that I wasn't shooting in the dark anymore. My suspicions were correct. She knew what was happening. There might really be a way for me to end this. I called her a couple of more times, but she refused to pick up her phone. I knew what I had to do next. I paid my bills at the hotel, called my boss asking for sick leave, made my way to the airport, and I bought a ticket to Indore. The plane ride worsened my headache, making it impossible for me to sleep. Not that I was even trying to at this point. My grandma sounded scared when I spoke to her, finally convincing me that whatever entity I was dealing with wasn't exactly a friend. I was so exhausted at this point that it was becoming hard for me to differentiate between reality and dreams. I swear to God I saw him phase into and out of the toilet on the plane, but my sleep-deprived brain could very well have been hallucinating the whole thing. He appeared in the reflection on the window, and he might have been sitting next to me or not. Who the hell knows? I was just beginning to nod off when the plane touched down. The next thing I remember is getting out of a cab in front of my nanny's house in Ujjain. The entire journey from Indore to Ujjain is just gone from my memory, apart from brief flashes where I was experiencing microsleep, and my body would come out of mere seconds of sleep with violent, heart-stopping jerks. Nani's home is a pretty little bungalow nestled into an affluent corner of Ujjain. She had lived here with Nana after his retirement and had refused to shift even after he died 6 years ago, despite my mother pleading and warning her of potential murderers. Old people are stubborn, aren't they? I walked up the gravel path, rang the doorbell, and I waited patiently. It took her a while to get to the door, old and frail as she was. "Who is it?" she asked. I imagined she was peering through the peephole, looking at me. Not that it would be much of a help to her at her age. "Newspaper bill, madam," I replied. She slowly opened the door, and her eyes widened as she realized who it was. She had no right to be surprised. If she knew the truth of what was happening, she must have known that I would come. "Hi, Nanny." I gave her a quick hug and entered the house before she could react. 15 minutes later, I was sitting on my favorite couch, sipping Nanny's tea while she sat in front of me, nervously twiddling her thumbs. I had spent so many wonderful summer holidays in this place, but I wasn't here for nostalgia's sake. I had a clear objective and I needed to get to the point ASAP. "Please, Nanny, tell me everything," I said gently. She fidgeted, and it looked like she was going to lie, before taking a deep breath and speaking what I was now sure was the truth. 20 years ago, she began, I was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was pretty bad. Chemotherapy wasn't working, and your Nana was going further and further into debt because of the medical costs. I nodded. I had heard about her illness and eventual recovery. I had no hopes of survival. It was hopeless, and I had accepted that fact. Until, I prodded. I met this man, she replied. He was in the hospital, in the bed next to me, but I don't think that he was a real patient, you know. He had these strange, sparkling eyes, almost like an angel. It was like God had answered my prayers. I clenched my fist at this. He spoke to me, she continued. He was very attentive and caring. He listened to me vent for God knows how long, and then... And then what? I asked. He said he could cure my sickness, make the pain go away. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. How? I asked. He offered me a deal, she answered. What deal? I asked, shifting forward. She didn't say anything, turning her face away in guilt. What deal? I asked again, forcefully this time. He said. She was in tears now. I was losing my patience. What did he say? I shouted. She shrank back in fear and I immediately felt guilty. But before I could apologize, she began speaking again. A day for a night for a day, she said softly. What the hell? I don't have time for riddles, Nanny. Please tell me what that means. She was looking terrified now, her eyes darting around like a cornered rat. But I wasn't going to let her retreat from the situation. It means that he would take a day from my grandson's life and give it to me each night or something. I sat there stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole 18 years of my life, I asked aghast. I didn't think you would ever find out, she pleaded pathetically. I put my hand up and she immediately shut up. I then brought this hand further up and I began furiously running it through my hair. Shit, I needed to get out of this place. I was feeling cornered, betrayed, frightened. I don't know. All of those nights that I lay scared out of my wits' end, my soul was being sucked out, one day at a time. I walked to the front door, put my hand on the knob, and before turning to look at my grandmother one last time, who was weeping. You know what? I said. Don't ever talk to me again. You're dead to me. And with that, I slammed the door shut behind me. I would regret that later. I walked over to the park outside of her house and I began to wander aimlessly. She had brought that monster into my life. My own grandmother betrayed me. Every time that I visited her house, played in her lap, all the food she had cooked for me, all this time she knew she was condemning me to this fate. Not only did it take 18 years from my future, she also destroyed the 18 years that I lived through. All that childhood trauma. God, I was so mad that I could rip my hair out. But I needed to focus on the situation at hand. This entity was sucking on my soul, one day each night. I had already lost around 18 years of my lifespan to her selfishness. Who knows what that thing is going to do now that I know about its existence? I had to get him to stop feeding off of me. But how? Damn. I would have to go back and ask her if there is a way to end this curse. My dramatic announcement will have to be put on hold for some time. But what if that can't be done? What do I do then? The fact that I was dealing with this supernatural problem convinced me that going about this the conventional way just wouldn't work. I had been thinking about something and finally decided to go through with it. I called one of my batchmates and I arranged with somebody for a meeting from the Mahakale Shard Temple Management Committee. Perks of being a government officer, I guess. I needed help, but maybe I'll find it in religion. If the Shiva Temple of Ujjain can't help me, maybe nothing can. I closed my eyes, letting all of my emotions wash over me. It had been a long couple of days. The exhaustion began to set in, and I was about to sleep on this park bench when I remembered why I absolutely must not do that, and I violently shook myself. No, I wasn't letting that bastard take even a second from my lifespan. The next time that I sleep, it would only be after I was able to rid myself of this monster. Preparing myself to have another conversation with my grandmother, I plodded over back to her house. Alarm bells began ringing as I saw that her front door had been left ajar. Cautiously, I tiptoed my way inside, looking for any signs of trouble. I found my grandmother in the exact same spot that I left her, sitting in a pool of blood. Her jaw had been ripped from her skull and was hanging loosely over her chest. I could see her tongue hanging out, longer than I thought was possible. I would have screamed if I wasn't too terrified to do so. My knees felt weak and I collapsed on the floor as I kept on staring at her dead body. I became a coughing, sobbing mess as I had a panic attack right next to my dead grandmother. It was not pretty. Terrified at the sight in front of me, but too scared to move away, I stayed on my knees, panting and wheezing. Soon I found myself crawling over to her body. To do what? I don't know. I felt an overwhelming surge of guilt. Why? I don't know. I just wished that I could take it back. Wished that this nightmare would end. Even after everything that had happened, I still wasn't prepared for what would happen next. Her hand shot up and it grabbed me by the throat, pulling me in close to her. My eyes widened in fear, and I began to thrash around violently, trying to get myself free. But she held on with a monstrous strength. The pupils in her eyes jumped around at an unnatural speed as she continued to pull me in closer. I started to fight harder to get free, but to no avail. I felt her breath on my ear, and then I saw her unhinged jaw begin to move as I heard this malicious whisper right next to my ear. A day for a night, a night for a day. I woke up to the cold, hard floor digging into my back. Slowly blinking my eyes open, I looked around at my surroundings. My nanny's house. The darkness and the annoying sound of crickets made me realize that I had been out for a while. But for how long had I been asleep? As I gingerly started to get up using my elbows and taking the supports of my favorite couch, all the memories of the past few hours came flooding back and I fell back down. Good God, did all of that really happen? I spun my head around to look at the spot where I had found the dead body of my grandmother. There was nothing there. No nanny, no blood. Nothing except for a forlorn, dusty chair. Was any of that real? Or had I dreamt it all up? And if it was just a dream, and the monster was just messing with my head, then where was my grandmother right now? I dragged myself up to the couch, sighing in relief as my back rested against something comfortable after hours. My left knee was killing me, and I don't even know how I injured the damn thing. After resting for about a minute, I got up and I began looking for Nanny. I checked each and every room of the house twice, but there was no sign of her. Things just kept getting more and more confusing. I was feeling so lost and helpless. My last conversation with Nanny kept on playing inside my mind over and over. The extent of her betrayal was unbelievable, yes, but try as I might, I couldn't shake off this feeling of guilt over treating her so badly in what turned out to be her last moments. I guess I'm just messed up in the head. As I shifted on the couch to move into a more comfortable position, my phone rubbed against my thigh, and I suddenly remembered that I had made plans to visit the temple to get help with the situation. Vishal, my batchmate, had texted to inform me that I had a meeting with somebody from the temple management committee at 8:30 in the morning, which was 5 hours from now. I had slept uninterrupted for over 7 hours. It wouldn't be appropriate to visit a temple covered in grime and smelling like shit, and so I decided to take a bath. As weird as it was to be doing so in this house after everything, I made my way over to the bathroom, which was attached to the guest bedroom, and I switched on the water heater. These moments of quiet inactivity in between all the insanity that my life had were the hardest to deal with. This was when I would begin to question my sanity, try and process my emotions, just nerve-wracking stuff. I would much rather deal with the soul-sucking demon. I wondered what I would tell my mom about what happened to her mother. Should I say that I was never here or concoct some other bullshit? And why the hell was my knee hurting so much? After roughly 10 minutes or so, I stripped out of my boxers and I walked into the bathroom. Turning on the tap for the hot water, I turned around to get a good look at my reflection, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. Wrinkles marred my once youthful-looking face. My skin had turned dry, and my hair wore a disgusting shade of salt and pepper, with much more salt there than pepper. It was as if, no, I had aged by 20 to 25 years. I looked like a middle-aged man in his mid-50s. Shit. I furiously rubbed the mirror, as if that would wash away the years that I had aged. I screamed in frustration and anger. That thing had stolen even more of my years than the last few hours. It was now actually letting me feel the after effects of its greed, as if to taunt me that it could take anything it wanted and I could do nothing about it. My stomach was a swirling pit of murderous loathing. I could rip that bastard apart with my bare hands, and I will, and soon. About 4.5 hours later, after a bath and a good meal, I was standing outside of the majestic Mahakaleshwar temple. The Bazam Arti had finished a couple of hours ago, so there wasn't as much of a crowd as it would have been, and I easily found my friend, Vishal. Hi. I greeted him as I walked up close to him. He looked confused. It's me, Aditya, I added. He looked even more confused at that, but soon began to recognize me, and his eyes widened in shock. Yeah, I know. It's why I'm here, I said before he could reply. Dude, how? He asked, his voice low, as if he couldn't believe what was going on. I'll tell you everything. Let's just meet whoever we came to meet, I said. We entered the temple premises, but instead of going to the shrine itself, turned and started to walk towards the office buildings, past the mass of people. Devotees thronged the temple all throughout the day, so keep in mind when I say that there wasn't much of a crowd. I do mean by Indian standards. Vishal kept looking over his shoulders at his suddenly aged friend. Buddy, you have no idea, I thought. We were met by a shirtless man in a saffron dhoti who took us to one of the bigger offices in the building. I guess he was one of the main pujaris here, based off of the respect the others were giving him. He asked us to sit down and offered us water, which we gratefully accepted. Vishal introduced me as his batchmate, and I closely watched the pujari for his reaction. He didn't look at all shocked, and that was a relief. "So, how can I help you, Aditya?" he asked. I didn't say anything, just pulled out my camera from my bag and I showed him that video. Vishal jumped up and walked over to the pujari's side to get a better look. They watched the video in silence, Vishal showing much more emotions on his face than the pujari. "Is this real?" Vishal asked after the video ended. "Is this real?" I replied, pointing at my face, and he solemnly nodded. "Wow, so this isn't like video editing or something?" he asked, amazed. I pointed at my face again. "Does this look like... Okay. He cut me off. "I get it already. Wow." "Listen, Aditya," the pujari said. "We get a lot of requests about things like this. Most of them are just superstitious people who's misdiagnosed a mental illness. But this is something else. Can you help me?" I asked hopefully. "No, I cannot." He shook his head. "Let's just say it's not my area of expertise." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. I thought that I was moving forward, but here I was, back to square one. I felt the weight of all 50 plus years of my life on my chest. "But," the priest added, "I know someone who can. Mahakal must be on your side, because that somebody happens to be here today. Let me call him. Please, wait here." Hope began to build inside of me again, but I controlled it. There was no guarantee that this person could help me. No sense in getting my hopes up and then just getting them dashed again. Vishal started pestering me about my situation, but I told him to wait. I said I'll tell him when the pujari comes back. No sense in recounting my trauma again and again. We sat in an awkward silence, with Vishal occasionally glancing at me in wonder, for about 15 minutes before the pujari walked back in with another man behind him. This guy was younger than me. I mean younger than my 26-year-old self. Dressed in green kurta and jeans, with a tattoo of a trident piercing a crescent moon smack dab in the middle of his forehead. He looked like an edgy college student who worshipped Shiva only because it was edgy, and probably even was. But he certainly didn't look like the kind of man who would be of assistance to me. But then again, looks can be deceiving. He shook my hand, pulled a chair, and he sat down next to us. "This is Rocky," the pujari said. "At least that's what he's known as. He has some experience in this field." Rocky nodded. "So, what's wrong?" he asked, and I showed him the video. Does this look like anyone you know?" he asked after watching it. "What? No," I replied. He sighed. "So, what happened after this video? How did you end up like this?" He pointed at me. I launched into my story. I told them everything that had happened to me, from the doll to the nighttime visit, to the last night's incident with Nanny. "Your nanny is dead?" Vishal asked, amazed. "Yes, I mean maybe, I don't know," I answered truthfully. Maybe I had dreamt it all up, and he had kidnapped her or something. Verbalizing this makes me sound like a lunatic. "Wow," Vishal said. So, can you help me? I asked Rocky. No, he answered. Well, shit. To be precise, no one can, he added. His brow furrowed, making the trident shift in a bizarre way. I know what this thing is. See, when I first saw the video, I thought it was a skinwalker because of the eyes. No, I hope that it was a skinwalker, because that at least I can deal with, and that has weaknesses that we can exploit. But when you told me about your grandmother, this is a pisage. At least I now knew what was haunting me, and that's progress. A pisage has no weaknesses, Rocky continued. It's a very powerful, immortal creature. It feeds off the souls of its victims, like a vampire, if you will. He rubbed his trident. There are only a handful of them that we know of. The last one that our people encountered was back during the emergency days. Nothing works in this thing. We can't kill it, we can only slow it down. How? I asked softly. By eliminating its food source and containing it, he replied in a matter-of-fact way. Excuse me, I exclaimed. You wanted to know how to do it. I'm telling you, Rocky pointed out. As long as it has people it can feed off of, it'll continue to find idiots like your grandmother to manipulate and fatten itself. Rocky, you're being rude, the Bajari chastised him. So you can't do anything? Vishal asked. I didn't say I wouldn't do anything, Rocky said. Look, all I'm saying is that we can try to stop this thing, but you have to be aware of the fact that you probably won't make it out alive. I shuddered, but I nodded. How do we go about this? I asked. We find out where it lives and we attack it there, Rocky answered. See, what do you do when you're starving? I shook my head, not knowing where he was going with this. You stretch out your food supplies, he continued. And I'm guessing that's what he's been doing to your nanny, or any other poor suckers that it had managed to ensnare in its trap in the past. If it has so many people, why does it need me? I asked. You're alive, fully so, that's why, he replied. You think there are other people like me being slowly killed by him? I wondered. I doubt it. Your video shows that it usually takes him the better part of a night to feed. I guess it's slow because he expends energy to feed as well, Rocky said. So how do we find out where he lives? I asked. We put you to sleep. Wait for him to come and feed on you and track him back to his home, he said with a straight face. No, I protested. I can't fall asleep again. Look what happened to me the last time that I slept. There's no way I'll survive it again. I'll be close by, Rocky said. I'll wake you up before he can take too much of your life. What if you don't get to me on time? I asked. I warned you that this was risky, Rocky replied. What do you think would happen here? We would chant some mantras and give you a magical weapon to slay the monster. It doesn't work that way. You have to make sacrifices. I grit my teeth but nodded, albeit indignantly. We decided to put our plan into motion that evening, giving Rocky time to make some preparations. I thanked the Pajari and said my goodbyes to Vishal, though he protested, but I wasn't having any of it. He was getting married in less than a month. There's no way that I would have his death on my conscience. He finally relented after I agreed to keep in touch and to call him if I needed anything. I also spoke to my parents, telling them that everything was okay and that the phone conversations we had about the dolls were nothing important. I have never been a very religious man, always sitting on the fence between theism and atheism. But I decided to spend the day visiting various religious places in the city anyway. Having my lunch at the local Gurdwara. It felt a lot like I was wrapping up my business in this world and preparing to die, but regardless, I was a lot calmer by the time evening rolled on. And as I checked into one of the seedier hotels that Rocky had picked, I felt somewhat at peace. "Why this place?" I asked. "The police will just be a distraction at this point," he said. "It's better to choose a place they won't quickly visit." As we had our dinner, we went over the modalities of the plan. We weren't going to follow him in his car all the way back to his place. We just wanted the number plates. Those could then be used to find out what identities he was using, properties registered to that name, and to raid those properties all at once and blow them up. It was risky, yes, but we couldn't let him know we were planning on doing something as balls out as invading his home. He could shift his base at the slightest whiff of danger, and then I would be screwed. I marveled at the scale of it all. How could this young man be sitting in front of me, possibly be running, be a part of something capable of pulling this off? But I didn't want to bite the hand that was going to feed me, and so I wisely kept my mouth shut. After dinner, I made my way to my room, casually looking for where the cameras were hidden. Rocky caught me doing that and told me to stop. We parted ways in front of my room. He was staying in the room next to me, and assured me that he would immediately jump in to help if he sees anything strange on the camera, like a hungry pisage. So there I was again, flat on my back, looking up at another ancient ceiling fan, waiting to fall asleep. I swear to God, if I survived this, beds would end up becoming PTSD triggers for me. Of course, it took me a long time to fall asleep. That old stereotype of old people being quick sleepers wasn't as of yet true for me. I wondered if I would even wake up, and I hoped that Rocky would get revenge for me if I didn't. Such morbid thoughts were swirling around in my head when I slowly drifted off to sleep. It was some trashy Kumar Sanu song being played at full volume on speakers that I hadn't even noticed. That woke me up. Feeling extremely groggy, I opened my eyes to see that face again, just inches from mine. His mouth was turned into this vicious snarl, shining eyes glaring daggers at me, trying to pierce my very soul. His breath was foul. It smelled like death. I froze in fear, not knowing what to do. He brought one of his long, clawed hands up and began choking me. He was furious. Did he figure out what we were planning? Or was this just anger at having his meal interrupted? I thrashed around, clawing at his arms, but he held on. I heard banging on the door. It sounded like Rocky was trying to force his way in. A loud bang later and the door gave in, and light from the hallway outside came pouring in. Rocky walked in with a shotgun that he aimed at the pisage. The monster turned around and snarled at my rescuer. Rocky opened fire, the shotgun shells passing harmlessly through the monster's body and slamming into the wall behind him. I coughed as air rushed into my lungs. The pisage gave me one last look and casually just walked into and out of one of the side walls, maintaining eye contact with Rocky, who was carefully following his each and every movement. "You okay?" Rocky asked after a good 30 seconds. "Yeah," I said, a little shaken but fine. How long was I out? 25 minutes. I set off the alarm as soon as I saw him walk in. He replied. "Thank you," I said gratefully. "Did we get the number plates?" Rocky nodded. I felt so goddamn happy. Finally, I put that thing on the back foot for the first time. "Next time I see you, it's going to be me walking into your bedroom." I did not want to take this job. Coming back after dealing with a particularly nasty deity on rapport, I was really looking forward to a break, something that I hadn't had in over a year. When Guruji called me for another job, I knew this was going to be trouble as soon as I saw the video, and it only became worse when I realized that I was dealing with a goddamn Pisha. At some level, I felt sorry for the poor bastard sitting in front of me. Losing over half your life in the span of a few days is not something anybody should go through. But while I did sympathize with him, I was not an emotional fool. I was pragmatic enough to understand that he would most likely die trying to take this monster down. Believe me, having this type of clarity in this line of work can mean the difference between your own life and death. So while some of you may think that I'm an asshole, I don't care at the least bit, as long as my work is done. So why Ranchi then? He asked with a confused expression on his face. It makes the most sense, I replied. Of the 3 properties we traced to your sleep time, buddy, this was the most recent purchase. It's a farmhouse in the ass end of nowhere, a perfect hiding spot, and it happens to be near the same city where you started your job. But we'll be hitting all 3? He asked and I nodded. And we'll need you to go back to your house in Ranchi, I said. That way we'll make him go back to his base and we'll hit him there. So I'm acting as bait again. He was offended but also a little scared. Yes, I nodded. But you won't be sleeping this time. So rest assured you won't have to worry about losing any more years. Aditya didn't look convinced, and that didn't surprise me at all. He didn't have a lot of years. One more slip and the Pisach would suck the life right out of him. One more thing, I continued. Keep in mind that when we're raiding his hideout, you would be a threat to him, and not just food. He won't go easy on you this time. But he will avoid killing you, and that's something I won't hesitate to use to my advantage. He was going easy on me this whole time, he asked mockingly. Always with the sarcasm, asshole. Well, you're about to find out, aren't you? I replied sweetly. Here, take this, I said, handing him a pill. What is it? He questioned. Modafinil, I replied. Take this at around 2 or 3 a.m. It'll keep you awake. A couple of hours later, Aditya left for Indore, from where he would take a flight to Ranchi, and I would follow him on the next plane. We wanted to give this illusion to the Pisach that our partnership had ended and that Aditya was going back after having given up on trying to fight. Who knows how effective our little ruse will be? We had to take that chance though. If there was even the slightest possibility that would improve our chances, we had to do it. Besides, I had a couple of things to take care of in the meantime. I made some phone calls and arranged for some weapons to be made available on Ranchi itself. Transporting guns from here would have taken too long, and it would be too risky with the government breathing down hard on the necks of any smugglers. I then arranged for some kidnappers and such from the surrounding area. Yes, you heard that right. Kidnappers, gangsters, etc. Our people regularly work with criminal elements and use them as meat shields against monsters. It keeps us safe. It saves lives of innocent people, weakens the monsters, and cleans our streets at the same time. They are never told what exactly they're attacking, and most die in the process. It's questionable from an ethical standpoint, especially when you are a communist, but highly efficient. The sky was a pale shade of blue when my plane landed in Ranchi. Delhi's poisonous smog had shifted east and made its way here, keeping visibility low. I was just glad that my flight hadn't been delayed. That would have been a big problem. I had a light breakfast at the airport itself and then took a cab to Aditya's house where I found him right outside. looking exasperated as he tried to reason with the 30-odd men who were camped outside. He threw his hands up when he saw me. "Who the hell are all these people?" he demanded. "They wouldn't say anything at all." "Friends," I replied. "Friends?" His brow furrowed in suspicion. I nodded and I walked over to speak to my contact here. Aditya buzzed around me like an agent bee, pestering me with questions while I inspected my weapons. I held up a 9mm pistol. "You know how to use this?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "They taught us the basics at the academy." "All right then," I said, looking at a little band. "Let's go." It took us over an hour to reach the farmhouse, with Aditya staying silent the entire time, probably contemplating his life and probable death. I was fine with that. The less distractions before a job, the better. The fog had cleared by the time we had reached the Pisach's base, a quaint little farmhouse that could serve as a rich family's vacation home in happier times. But now, it was hiding the worst sort of nightmares known to man. We parked our cars some distance from the building, trying to avoid being seen. I got out of the car, put the sling of my rifle around my shoulder, and went to speak to my contact, with Aditya staying on my heels. My contact, a man named Lucky, here was much like me. Early 20s with a tattoo of the trident and crescent on his forehead. "We're ready," I told him. "Send them in." He nodded and he barked some orders at the low-life criminals who set off running towards the house, armed with their 303s. Lucky then came jogging back and shook my hand. "It's all yours now," he said. "I'm off." And with that, he got in his car and he left. "Wait," Aditya said. "Won't we need that car? How are we going to fit that many people in the other cars?" I didn't say anything, and I continued to focus on the farmhouse. They were at the front door now, and my heart was beating quickly. It would start any second now. "Oh no," Aditya spoke from beside me. "You don't expect them to make it out of this alive, do you? Holy shit." I shushed him, and we waited in silence as our team entered the building. A couple of tense minutes passed and nothing happened as our criminal friends searched the building. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe our plan didn't work and the Pisach was smarter than we thought and chose not to take the bait. If not here, I hope that he was at the other two sites, because if not, I have no idea how to proceed from there on. Would we have to ask Aditya to sleep again? And then what? Attack him the moment that he comes to feed? It's too risky. Luckily, my chain of thoughts were cut off by loud, painful screaming coming from inside of the farmhouse. "Oh shit," Aditya whispered nervously. My hunch was correct. That arrogant asshole was here. He probably thought that he could take us all out at his home turf. Gunshots followed as the criminals started to battle the Pisach. I imagine they were in for a heck of a surprise. They thought they were attacking some hapless middle-aged businessman, and not a soul-sucking demon from hell. A loud explosion ripped through the air, shaking the earth as shards of glass broke out from one of the windows, and bright orange flames leapt into the air, licking at the bright sunny sky. More screaming followed. "All right," I said, tapping Aditya on his arm. "Let's go." "Are you crazy?" He looked at me wide-eyed. "You want me to go into the middle of that?" I began moving towards the building, keeling my gun on my shoulder and a finger next to the trigger. I heard Aditya shuffling behind me, and in seconds, he was close to me. "You think they got him?" he whispered. I didn't give him an answer, and I don't think he expected one either. We saw one of the criminals come tumbling outside, covered in blood, looking shell-shocked. And the next second, he was pulled back inside with terrifying speed, and Aditya yelped from behind me. I thought it'd be weaker in the day, he whispered. Shut the hell up, I admonished him. Sorry, I talk when I'm nervous, he blabbered. Shut up anyway, I repeated. I told him that the thing had no weaknesses. Should have paid attention in class. A terrifying silence had descended on the area by the time we had reached the door. Our breathing and the slightest crunch of the gravel underneath our shoes being the only sound that we could hear. I began sweating. Surely, they couldn't have been taken out this quickly. Had I underestimated his strength? Regardless, we had come too far to turn back now. I slowly walked inside the open door and I took in my surroundings. Bullet holes in the walls, blood splattered everywhere, tables and chairs thrown around, and heat coming in waves from one of the rooms in the back that had witnessed an explosion. The house looked like a war zone. But the most disturbing thing were the bodies. It was a ghastly scene with limbs strewn here and there, and the stench of burnt flesh heavy in the air. I walked straight ahead, carefully clearing every room one after the other, but I found no sign of the Pisach. I was wondering where he had run off to when I heard Aditya calling for me. Hey, check this out. His voice was coming from back in the living room. One of them is alive. Impossible. I had just come from there and I hadn't seen any sign of movement. I quickly made my way back and found him hunched over one of the wounded criminals, who was twitching wildly. Step back, Aditya, I warned him. You're too close. Before he could move away, the wounded man snarled and bit Aditya's left hand with all his might, making him scream. I tried to get a shot off, but I didn't have a clear line of sight, so I moved in closer. Aditya screaming out louder as the man bit harder, drawing blood and piercing flesh. There was a sickening crunch as he bit so hard that Aditya's bone shattered, making me afraid that he would pass out. The man shook his head wildly, like a starving dog with a juicy bone, trying to bite the hand clean off, and it looked like he was succeeding. I moved in, took out my pistol, and shot the rabid monster in the head. Once, twice. But he held on with unnatural strength, refusing to let go. Aditya's hand now hung on loosely from his wrist, and he screamed even harder. Not knowing what else to do, I took out my knife and I swung it with all my might, slicing Aditya's hand clean off, and then I shoved him aside before emptying my gun into the monster's head. That thing finally stopped moving and I sighed in relief. I quickly moved over to Aditya's side and I cauterized his wound. It was a miracle that he was still conscious. What a tough dude. He was wincing in pain, but he seemed otherwise fine. I made him sit on one of the many bullet-riddled chairs. After that, I picked up a shotgun lying on the floor, and I went around destroying the brains of the criminals lying dead at various places around the house. I wasn't going to give the Pisach another chance at pulling something like this again. Aditya had tied a belt around his stump by the time that I circled back to him. Like I said, tough. I was getting impressed with him. You find him? He asked, his teeth gritting in rage and pain. I shook my head. I had searched every nook and cranny of this place, but he wasn't here. There was only one place that he could be. There must be a basement or something, Aditya suggested. There is a trapdoor outside of the kitchen. It's the only place that I haven't looked, I said. Okay, he grunted. Let's go. You okay? You still want to come? I asked. His eyes hardened and I knew that was the only answer I was going to get from him. I wrenched the trapdoor open and saw that a rickety old ladder led down a dimly lit path. At least it wasn't completely dark. I mused as I began my descent. After reaching the tiled floor, I helped Aditya climb down as well. This is it, I thought. The final stage. The basement was big, much bigger than I had expected. Its total floor area must have been more than the house I was sitting under. Whoa. Aditya whispered as he took in the sight in front of him. Rows upon rows of hospital beds lay in front of us, being illuminated by lamps hanging over them intermittently. On these beds were the shriveled up husks of the Pisha's past victims that he was forcibly keeping alive to feed off of. I don't know how much energy they gave him, but they certainly made for a disturbing sight with tubes sticking out of their decaying bodies. If we destroyed these, it'll be pretty much game over. Do you think my Nani is here too? Aditya asked. I looked at him. Tears were running down his tired face. Listen, I said. You can't empathize with these people. They aren't alive, you understand. This isn't even euthanasia. Euthanasia might have gray areas, but this doesn't. He nodded. I brought up my rifle and I began killing those who had been tortured by this thing for possibly hundreds of years. The muzzle of my gun flashed as more and more of his food supply was erased. I stopped when I heard furious growling. Where is he? Aditya asked. Where are you? He shouted. I heard rustling from above us and I looked up and saw a pair of shining eyes gazing down at me from the darkness above. I pulled the trigger, but my bullet sailed harmlessly through his body and smashed into the ceiling as he leapt down at me and began slashing away with his vicious claws, slicing away huge chunks of my flesh. I tried to fight him off, but he was even stronger than I was and I was slowly losing. He bit a chunk off my shoulder when Aditya wobbled over. He made a solid kick at the ribs of this asshole, but his leg just passed through the Pisha's body and he slipped, falling hard on his ass. The Pisha snarled and growled and made his way over to his favorite meal, giving me some time to breathe. I was losing far too much blood, far too quickly. We needed to end this fast. I tried to get up, but my head began to swim and I fell down to the floor. My vision became blurry and I started blinking furiously to clear it. I heard a loud thunk and with my hazy vision, saw that Aditya had been struck on the head with some sort of blunt object and was now knocked out. The Pisha was hunched over him, preparing to suck the life out of him. Shit. If he succeeds, he'll regain whatever energy we had worked so hard to drain from him, and I would most certainly die here. There was only one thing I could do in this situation. With trembling hands, I searched for my pistol. The Pisha began to suck. I really needed to frickin' hurry. My heart jumped in jubilation as my hand fell on my gun. Yes, I can still do this. I took that gun and I aimed it at Aditya's head. My vision was still hazy. My hands were trembling. I was terrified that I would miss. If I didn't land a perfect shot, the Pisha would come over to finish me off and then go back to its meal. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the trigger. A shot rang so loudly my ears began to ring, but I knew that it had connected because the Pisha screamed in murderous rage. It was not over. I might have stopped him from rejuvenating himself, but I still hadn't taken him down. He turned his wrathful gaze at me and walked over towards me, fully intent on finishing me off. I aimed the gun at him and I pulled the trigger. My heart sank as the gun clicked, but no bullet shot out. This is it. This is how I was going to die. Doing a job that I didn't want to take with no one in this world to mourn my death. But I wasn't going out without a struggle. That just wasn't who I was. I began to fight him off with everything I had, even though I knew I was going to lose. I don't really know whether it was my bullets that had woke him up, or it was just his insane willpower. At the time, I thought that I had killed Aditya, but my bullet had merely hit him on the arm from which I had separated a hand earlier. He got up on his feet and he started walking towards us, a baseball bat in hand, while I continued to struggle against the Pisha. Aditya stood over us, took a deep breath, and swung the bat with all of his might. Our efforts at tiring the monster out finally succeeded, as the bat connected with a satisfying crunch. Aditya didn't stop. He continued to swing his mighty hammer of death again and again and again, until the monster's head was nothing but a gooey mess. Aditya wobbled over on his feet, but steadied himself, and then he bent towards me. I thought he was going to help me up, but no. He picked up my rifle and aimed it at the Pisage's body, and emptied the clip one bullet at a time. He then began kicking the thing's body, pushing himself beyond the point of exhaustion. "Stop," I coughed. "It's over, he's dead." 20 minutes later, Aditya was sitting on the hood of my car, beaten, shot, and mutilated, but still somehow conscious, while I lifted his grandmother's body into the trunk. His face was even more worn now. He easily looked like he was in his late 50s. "So what are you going to do with him?" he asked, pointing at the rucksack containing the remains of the Pisage. "Burn it," I replied, "and then bury the ashes under a ton of cement." He nodded. He looked old but relieved, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders, which it of course had. "How are you perfectly fine?" he asked. "I saw you. He hurt you worse than me, and yet here you are, walking around like nothing had happened." I didn't say anything. "How did you cauterize my wound?" he asked, pointing at his stump. "Sure, keep your frickin' secrets," he muttered. "Try to kill me but won't even tell me the truth." "So what are you going to do now?" I asked. "Go back to your old life?" He shook his head. "I can't. There's no way to reasonably explain this." "Late onset progeria?" I suggested. He laughed bitterly. "No," he said. "I can't let my parents see me like this. No parent should have to watch a child die, least of all in this manner. I need a clean break." An idea began to form in my head. "Hey," I said, "why not come work with us?" "Seriously?" he laughed. "My body can't handle any more of this." "Not field work," I corrected him. "We need help with the office, or the administrative work. We'll give you a new identity, and give your old self a clean death." Hope began to form in his eyes. "You don't have to say yes now," I assured him. "Just think about it while you recuperate." We both turned our heads as we saw a car approaching us. It was an ambulance owned by someone our people had helped in the past. "Thank God," I said. "I really need to rest." He nodded. "I can't wait to be in bed," I added. "Screw that," Aditya exclaimed. "I'm never going anywhere near a bed again for the rest of my life, however short it might be." And with that, we both began to laugh.